Close the door.
Maybe we just have a mindfulness moment. Did everybody's iPhone tell them to be mindful just now? Or on their watch? I think it's what just happened. All right. Ready?
Yeah.
Let's go back here. Cool. All right. Some of you may know me, some of you may not know me. So I'm your first speaker, Jim Lavelle. I spent a little bit of time in this space, about 38 years now. So I've been around personalized, precision, integrative, regenerative, functional, whatever you want to call it, healthcare for about 38 years. Spent about 17 years teaching actually natural therapies at the University of Cincinnati College of Pharmacy and Medicine. So I had to do a little bit of an academic stint and write 4 databases, I think, and published maybe 20 books in the space. So I hope what you come out of this talk, what you're going to come out with, is a different appreciation. First of all, why testing for foods are so important. And obviously, but it's also kind of what's the extension and the tethers and the links to what's going on globally in an individual, because you're not just a liver, you're not just a pancreas, you're not just a lymphatic system. Everything's cross-talking and communicating all at once. And that's what we've got to get to, is understanding. You had a great question the other day. For example, a lot of times we get hyper-focused on it's the gut, it's the gut, it's the gut. And you forget that it's also this connection to the immune system and the brain. And you can work on somebody's gut forever. And if they're sympathetic dominant, and they're riddled with anxiety and they're not sleeping at night, chances are the signals that are going to that gut are going to keep it permeable, and you're going to continue to have problems, right? And we're going to go into that in depth, right? So let's get after it. So the first step is, the simple question: what causes a food allergy? Well, we'll get to the food allergy slides, but I want to go a little bit higher than that to get started. I hope.
Not working?
No. Oh man, defective equipment already. I just spiked my cortisol. I'm like all nervous now. My gut just got permeable. Watch out. So the first piece is the term that's in the literature now, and it has been, I don't think anybody paid attention to it or appreciated it, is this term called metainflammation. And it's really important to get a grasp of metabolic inflammation. So this term has been in the literature since 2008, actually. Back when I wrote the book, Cracking the Metabolic Code, which the second version is coming out this year, it was to get that message across that your metabolism just isn't the rate at which you're burning things. Your metabolism is driving every metabolic reaction in your body, and it's occurring from the time you're in your mother's womb and you take on that genetic potential through all the epigenetic changes that occur, the metabolomic changes, the transcriptomic changes. All of that is driving you to where you are today with your health. And sometimes you don't know what the status of that is if you don't look deep enough. And so what do we find out? We find out, well, wow, how did that person have such a difficult time with COVID? Or maybe they expired from COVID, they were so healthy. Well, maybe there was underlying metabolic inflammation that was going on that maybe they didn't characterize or look deep enough. So when you look at this was back in 2008. So this is like one of the earliest iterations of understanding what's going on with metabolic inflammation. So when you look, the obvious one is smoking. And then, of course, there's starvation. But it's good to starve now, right? Isn't that time restricted eating? No, wait. So there's overnutrition and then there's starvation, right? We know that when people eat too much, it triggers a lot of inflammation, right? Civilized societies, higher rates of heart disease, higher rates of diabetes, right? All that. So you can have overnutrition, undernutrition, excess alcohol intake. Clever, I disagree with them. No, it's true. You can't drink too much. Diet, and look, I don't believe one diet's right for everyone. I think that when we start to pigeonhole that, it starts to create problems for individuals. So there isn't one diet that's going to work for every last person. I've been doing a lot of work on looking at glycans, and you can actually look at pro-inflammatory and anti-inflammatory glycans, and you can kind of look at what's going on with a person's diet and how that's influencing their glycan expression, which is a markers for inflammation. All right, so interesting there. The next piece, of course, is lifestyle. You know, do I exercise? Do I over-exercise? I mean, I used to talk about just people being underactive. Now there's a lot of people that actually overtrain, you know, because they've got a trainer, and the trainer's, you know, doing a workout that is, you know, that's a 25-year-old trainer trying to train a 55-year-old person. And there's no understanding that, first of all, no matter how hard you try, you're probably not a world-class athlete. So why do a world-class athletes work out? You know, and when you start to understand this, it becomes important, because it's, well, what's right for me? You know, where's your heart rate at? Where's your heart rate at after you exercise? What's your heart rate the next day? Those are clues to what's going on with your nervous system when you exercise. And we'll get into that. I actually have slides on it. I hope I can get through all the slides. I gave you guys a lot of info. And then over here, of course, we already talked about inactivity. I mean, now that at least they've got those, if you guys, I don't know if you've seen these yet, but it's incredible that somebody thought of this. They've got remote controls for TVs that are actually weighted, and they've got a gyroscope on them so that you can train while you walk. Don't believe me. Don't believe me, guys. That's not true. It's not true. But you're not allowed to take the idea, because I think I'm going to come out with it. And then, of course, inadequate sleep, which is a pandemic. Even if people say they get enough sleep, typically they're waking up in the middle of the night, or they're not feeling rested, or they've got undiscovered apnea. But in general, people don't get enough sleep. Is that fair? Yeah. Right? It's pretty fair. And then, of course, there's this issue of, you know, environmental burden. So whether you're talking about biotoxins or toxic metals or glyphosates or other environmental pollutants, they're messing with me now. I was going. So, you know, so there's obviously this whole environmental burden piece. And then, of course, over-exercise, which I already mentioned, and then stress and depression, which is rampant. I mean, it was rampant before 2 years ago. Now it's really an issue, right? We got major problems in that area. But the bottom line is, and please don't take this the wrong way when I say it, but for all the Lululemon pants being sold in the United States, 80% of us are overweight, 42% are obese, 50% of our adult population are diabetic or pre-diabetic. So in the end, when people become overweight and obese, they're going to make more inflammatory compounds by default. And that leads to oxidative stress, insulin resistance, and of course, the upregulation of chronic non-communicable disease. We'll go into metaflammation a little deeper real soon here, so you can understand, well, what do you look for to understand that? Because in the end, as soon as I start to upregulate inflammatory compounds, guess what happens to the gut? It gets permeable. As soon as my L6 goes up, I upregulate claudin 2. As soon as claudin 2 goes up, my tight junction glycoproteins gap. They break down. So that protein scaffold breaks down as soon as you upregulate inflammatory cytokines. So it's not a question of whether, oh, do you think this person has a food allergy or sensitivity? It's how bad are they? Most of the time. Not always, but for a lot of people. And is it the global cause of what's going on? Well, it might not be cause, but it's one of the huge downstream effects, right? And then, of course, this little piece over here called drug use. What do you think of all the drugs, right? All the drugs on the US market, what percentage of drugs disrupt the microbiome? What do you think it is? 85? That's a little high. It's 25%. 25% of the drugs right now are thought that are on the market, and they're not just antibiotics. It's not just corticosteroids. It's things like metformin, antidepressants. So it's not just the drugs that you think like NSAIDs and PPIs, H2 blockers, the obvious, right? Because you're disrupting the pH, gastric pH. That creates an influence. It's other drugs as well. And a lot of people are on multiple meds. And you know what? Who shouldn't be on metformin? Metformin is the new drug that should be in our water, right? It used to be Crestor should be in the water. Now we're into not the thought that everyone should take metformin for us longevity folk. Obviously, I'm not an advocate, even though I like metformin as a drug. Okay, advance for me. Do you think maybe we need a battery? Maybe just need batteries. All right, so here, this was a 2018 publication, National Revisions in Cardiology. So the other thing you're going to notice is I tend to only use tier 1 primary referee journals that are really on top of what's going on. So if you look at this, metaflammation and the catabolic state. So what happens? My goal today is to like broaden your horizon of why you should be testing for food. I don't agree. Why? And I think you're going to feel like, I hope at the end that you should be testing more people if you're not. Because when you look at this, if you look to the far left, damage, cell debris, irritant chemicals, pathogens, intrinsic cell defects for the cause of inflammatory signaling. Right? It's why we trigger an inflammation response. It's a good thing to have an inflammation response, right? We need it. But what's supposed to happen is you eliminate the cause of the inflammation, you reset homeostasis, you switch off the inflammation, and then you're back to a homeostatic state in your body, right? That's ideal. And if you think of Reckwig's work in homotoxicology in the 1960s, if any of you guys are familiar with Reckwig, that's what he talked about. He talked about the more you create metabolic load, the deeper it gets into your tissue and then your cells and then your mitochondria, right? So when I can't turn this off, and for all the reasons that I said earlier, right? That big kind of a lifestyle piece, right? It's what am I exposed to? How am I eating? How's my stress? Am I sleeping? What kind of foods am I eating? Right? When I can't turn it off, there's major systemic effects that start to occur. Now, the first one isn't even on there, is dyslipidemias. So as soon as you see, I don't even do regular cholesterol panels anymore. They don't, without oxidized LDL, myeloperoxidase, LPA, LDL particle size, looking at apolipoprotein B, looking at ApoA, looking at ApoE3, 4, looking at the ApoE gene predilation for individuals, right? Without understanding that, you just don't know whether somebody's metabolically inflamed. So one of the first things that happen under metabolic inflammation is you get dyslipidemias. And that really, he should have had a box on this little chart that had dyslipidemias, right? Right over here. So the next piece is that you lose muscle mass. You get sarcopenic in a catabolic state. It makes sense because as soon as you start to trigger this, what's going to happen to cortisol, which we're going to go through a little bit later, obviously you start to create a loss of lean muscle mass perfusion, and then IGF-1 production and signaling. Now it's interesting. There's all this argument over, should your IGF-1 be high? Should it be low? It's not about whether it's high or low. It's whether or not your body is listening to the signal or not. And so people that are insulin resistant have very high IGF-1s. Does that mean they're going to live forever? Does that mean they're longevity based when they've got a high IGF-1? No, actually what that means is they're going to start creating signaling to their cells to create cancer. That's because they're with that insulin resistance also comes other hormone resistance, right? So it's about understanding that IGF-1 needs to be normalized. The next piece is you see these anemias, and I'm going to ask you, are you seeing more individuals where their iron levels are adequate and they have no ferritin? Are you seeing some of those folks? Are you looking for that? So people with normalized iron and very low ferritin, typically it's because of metabolic inflammation, because this is what happens. You upregulate hepcidin, you downregulate ferroportin, and when I downregulate ferroportin, I lower my EPO production, which is not good for the kidneys, right? So I'm not going to rebuild platelets, and then I decrease the recycling of my iron. So you'll see these transitions of high iron, low ferritin, then trending lower iron and continuing low ferritin. And sometimes you'll give iron and you'll go, well, why aren't they making ferritin? I can't get their ferritin up. Is this rare? I mean, you guys, am I just the only person seeing this, or you guys see this, right? As soon as you see that, what you have to think is, where is the metabolic inflammation at? Where is it? Meaning, what's the cause? Is it metals? Is it biotoxins? Is it environmental burden? Is it stress? Is it eating? You know, what is it? The next thing that happens is that you start to see changes in your insulin receptor signaling. So as soon as you start to create more inflammatory cytokines, you downregulate. IL-6 actually does this. It downregulates insulin receptor vigilance. That's what occurs. So you're supposed to what? You're supposed to have the insulin receptor get activated, and then what happens? You get GLUT4 translocation, you carry the glucose in, you make 38 packets of energy, and we forget. When GLUT4 gets downregulated, this basically induces kind of a Warburg-like effect, right? It's kind of, you rely on GLUT1, and when you rely on GLUT1, you're going to make 2 packets of energy, and the rest is going to be lactate, and the cell becomes acidotic. You start to make something called hypoxia inducible factor 1 alpha, right? Hypoxia inducible factor, a cell without oxygen. What happens to your mitochondrial DNA? Okay. It becomes immortalized. So when you look at, I wrote a book, a chapter in a book, it was a textbook called Diabetes and Cancer, Epidemiologic Links and Molecular Evidence. If you buy one for every patient and just ask them to read 1 page a night, everyone will sleep. It's that deep. It's crazy. So it was Carter Press, if you guys are interested in that. It was really, it was actually kind of groundbreaking, because at that time we really didn't know the molecular steps to why people with diabetes end up with cancer. And that kind of is what that book did, is it kind of led through all of that. But the bottom line here is, now what starts happening? Lactic acid dehydrogenase starts going up, baseline insulin starts going up, people are putting weight on. You tell them they need to stop eating carbs so much, they say, oh, you're so nice, doctor, you're right. You're so right, I really do need to stop. And on the way home, I stop and get 2 bagels and a couple of donuts. And why? It isn't because they don't want to listen to you. It's because they're a gas-sucking SUV metabolically. They're demanding that fuel, which is driving their metabolic dysfunction. So if I don't understand how to return, and obviously, look, we're all using fun things like MOD-SC and semaglutide. Great, it's going to help with this. But you still have to go upstream and understand this up here. What is the intrinsic nature of the inflammation that's going on in the body? Because it ends up, one of the biggest systems it really drives is gut immune brain. And I'm going to show you that in a little bit here. So the next thing that happens is I lose bone. So I upregulate my osteoclasts. I get the upregulation of IL-1 beta, upregulation of interleukin-6 and TNF alpha. All of these end up with bone loss. 3 in 10 cases of osteoporosis are now men. And they're not gray-haired, and they're not small-framed, and they're not blue-eyed, and they're not Asian, right? Which is what we think. Oh, you're a small-framed woman. You're at risk for osteoporosis. Add to that the fact that you've got a lot of men with low testosterone and are on PPIs for their GERD, and they've got metabolic inflammation going on. Where's their gut? Low T, poor gut digestion, increased inflammatory cytokines, gut permeability issues, right? How many times do you just fix GERD by taking the food allergens away, right? I mean, it's at least gets it there. You still got to work out. Probably the biggest things that are going on is over here. So if you look here at neurogenesis, and we think of that, everybody's talking about neuroinflammation now as this byproduct of, biotoxin exposure, which is completely right, but there's a lot of other reasons for neuroinflammation. Simply the breakdown of the gut and upregulation of lipopolysaccharide, which I'm going to go through, but lipopolysaccharide is what? Circulating endotoxin occurs when bacteria break down in your gut. The liver and lymph can no longer handle it. And now it starts to circulate and it attaches to organs. It's the reason for multi-organ heart failure. They've elucidated that now, right? Circulating endotoxin attaches to the myocytes, attaches to the kidneys, attaches to the liver, causes multi-organ failure. But in this case, it's real simple. Just the fact that I'm triggering this inflammatory response, and now I've got this gut breakdown and the upregulation of LPS, pathogens, right? All that triggers microglial activation. And once you activate microglial cells, you're going to create a lot of oxidative burst. You're going to stop regeneration of your progenitor cells. So you're not going to bud new neurons. You're not going to go through dendritic pruning, and you're not going to remain smart. You're going to feel like, why am I pushing a thought through Jello? Right? And then at the very end of this, and this is, of course, if we saw an acceleration of this, it was in our pandemic, right? Cytokine storm, mitochondrial uncoupling, people experiencing just rampant fatigue post-infection because it was such a meta-inflammatory response. So why is meta-inflammation so important? Because it leads to the other term, inflammaging. That's in the literature. I'm not making these terms up. These are the terms that are being used by researchers. Metabolic inflammation causes inflammatory aging. That's why it's important that we start to look at, well, how do I start to unwind this process? And that's what I hope I can do with you guys in a short 3 hours. Talk today. So I just wanted to show you this. This was developed, first drew this out in 1999. This is 2008 when we put this together. But so when you look at, this was the basis of, post-book, diet, drugs, exercise, environment, genetic stress, disease, leading to disruption of the HPA axis. If you look here, as we get stress, we imbalance TH1 and TH2, which upregulates interleukin 6, which then causes leaky gut, decreased nutrient absorption, decreases in serotonin, irritable bowel, food allergies, SIBO. Okay, so this was kind of what kicked it off for me. This was you guys got the slides, so you can certainly give these slides to folks.
Right. They were sent them, so you should all have received it.
Okay, cool. So you've got these, so please don't use them. So mitochondria, why? So I want you to think about when people are eating foods that are triggering allergies and sensitivities, that are triggering inflammatory signaling, it goes all the way to mitochondrial dysfunction. All right. So when you look at mitochondria and inflammation, what we see is over mitochondrial function linked to acute and chronic inflammatory processes. It's a major source of obviously free radicals, also targets and for quenching free radicals. But basically, I lose my capacity for generating energy. This was back in 2013, talking about metainflammation and the mitochondria. And of course, the more that we get this mitochondrial dysfunction, we create more and more inflammatory signaling. And so it becomes a vicious inflammatory cycle, right? So why is it so interesting for us now to look at mitochondrial repair? Obviously, people are going to do glutathione, we're going to do MOD-ST, we're going to look at SIRT1, we're going to use Thai ginseng, and we're going to use resveratrol, and we're going to use EGCG. Yeah, because you got to do everything you can to try to repair mitochondrial function in individuals. And this is just, it creates damage-associated molecular patterns get derived from this, which then triggers inflammasome activity. What is one of the best things you can do to countermeasure against? You guys are familiar with the NLRP3, NLRP6 inflammasomes. right? So your body makes inflammatory compounds, right? One of the biggest things that it creates are these compounds called inflammasomes. So what is the way that we lead to countermeasuring inflammasomes? Autophagy. Autophagy is the countermeasure to inflammation in your body. So when people had periods of famine or reduced calories, it was actually rejuvenating their body. Now, that doesn't mean you stay in that state all the time. It's kind of one of the things that if a little is good, then a lot's even better. I kind of believe that now that I've moved to Texas. I mean, I've got boots, I got a big hat now. I mean, I believe that more is better now.
The bigger is better.
The bigger the better. Yeah. Well, that'd be Dubai with buildings. They got big buildings. So the point being is this autophagy is counter-inflammatory activity. And what that means is that you do have to teach people how to eat a little less and a little less often. And I know I've got dietitians in the room, you guys have seen it. I know when I was running my contract research organization, we were doing diets with people and looking at studies for weight loss. I mean, somebody comes in and they think they're eating 2,000 calories a day. We query them and say, okay, what do you eat? I eat about 1,800 to 2,000 calories. And when you do the diet survey on them, 4,000 calories, right? So it's really important to kind of get that concept across, that inflammasomes, which I'm going to touch on a little bit more, but inflammasome activity is triggered by autophagy. And when autophagy is dysregulated, which means if I continually eat, or I'm getting mitochondrial damage, so I do not have the energetics to clean up the cell debris. If you remember on that metaflammation slide, it said excessive cell debris triggers inflammation on the far left-hand side of that slide. Excessive cell debris, right? I got to clean out the organelles. I got to get rid of proteins and peptides that have been used up, because all that stuff is pollution to your cell mechanics and especially to your immune system. All right. Okay, go to the next one. It's not working for me right now. So when you look, mitochondrial dysfunction activates NF-kappa B. NF-kappa B induces inflammasome activity, and that activates all the down spiral of inflammatory cytokines, right? So NF-kappa B, obviously, the gene regulator for inflammation, right? So things like curcumin are really good for trying to dampen NF-kappa B. There's other things too. And then in the end, what I'm really getting to is that what happens is you should be looking at neutrophils, you should be looking at monocytes on individuals. As people either have really high neutrophils or they've crashed out, that they're creating a tremendous amount of inflammatory response, which is then creating a lot of peroxyl nitrite and nitrogen-free radicals, which upregulate deoxyguanosine. And you can measure deoxyguanosine. So when you see people with high deoxyguanosines, by default, they've got metabolic inflammation. So this is probably the big compound that leads to DNA damage and mutation and genomic instability. Because when we do not regulate this inflammatory response, we lose our ability to repair our DNA. And that's that whole thing of when people get insulin resistant and they're making a bunch of acids, tissue acids, lactate in their cell, right? They pump the lactate out to kind of create more space for that cell to divide, right? You get the lactic acid pumps. When we're not managing that, right? This is the net. And this is why people that are diabetic end up with cancer. And it's why people that you think shouldn't have cancer end up with cancer, because they've got a lot of metabolic inflammation going on. And this is just the whole thing of immunometabolic health and impact on metaflammation. So if you look here, nutrient and energy status and stress is kind of where the heart of this is at. We get stress to the beta cells, we get microglial activation, we get, adipokine activation, and then of course you get fibrosis in the liver and you start triggering an immune environment in the liver as well. So what is your metabolism? It is directly under the influence of metabolic signaling. Your metabolism is the sum total of all the metabolic reactions going on in you right now that have occurred from the time you were gestated to now. What did you get exposed to? What kind of stress were you under? What drug were you on for 15 years and you're not on it right now? You got a drug-induced nutrient depletion, or you've got a drug-induced microbiome problem because you've been on a drug that disrupts your microbiome for years and years and years, right? Next slide. So understanding the disruptors to your current metabolic performance leads to your strategies. I think testing for foods is a central strategy because it's the one thing people take in every day. Like people may not breathe in, lead every day. Probably they are, but the one thing they do every day is they eat. And you just have to remember that when I'm chronically eating foods that are triggering inflammation, I'm reducing my capacity for autophagy. Now, this isn't the only thing people need to do. You need to, as we get through it, we'll see. There's a lot they need to do. So this is kind of, I'm starting with the end in mind. All right. So if you think of this, poor choices in food, stress and emotions, which I think is huge and way underserved, managing people's nervous systems. Infection, lectins, and no, I'm sorry, I don't think tomatoes are dangerous. People are living in Sardinia up to 100, and they're eating tomatoes, so I don't think it's really that caustic. But I think it's an issue when our gut is permeable and now we become sensitive to lectins. Sure, that's realistic, but people weren't meant to eat. Think about it. I mean, I remember, I'm old enough, I remember back when I was young. 1965, I was the king of kindergarten. You don't want to know why? I carried in peanut butter ho-hos. And I gave them out to everybody in the class. My mom would give me a box of Hostess peanut butter ho-hos and go, hey, make friends, Jimmy. That's the way the Italians do it. You make people love you with food, right? So here's the issue. If I brought peanut butter ho-hos into class now, I would have detention and maybe even get expelled for exposing people to a peanut allergy. It's not normal for us to be as reactive as we are. And we have to help people reprogram their immune system. And look, I eat a pretty dang clean diet. My father was a world famous chef. I learned how to eat really good food. All right. And then learn through integrative medicine, even furthering what is good food. Right. But my point is, restriction doesn't work forever on people. And don't you find it with some people, the more you restrict them, the more they become intolerant? That should be your first sign that you're not repairing them. All right. So systemic disease, low stomach acid, way underidentified, and intoxin exposure leads to intestinal permeability, which triggers food allergies. People are malnourished, right? We do their micronutrient status and we see that they're not absorbing well, their iron is low, they've got a normochromic megaloblastic anemia, right? That creates dysbiosis, and they get exposed to things, right? They get bad bugs in their gut that need to be eradicated, right? Hence the value of a good, stool test. And then of course, toxic overload. If we wanted to just pick one, glyphosate in the gut, right? Glyphosate in the microbiome. And it's just one. Think of mercury. Yeast grows in your gut because it's chlorating mercury. All right, got it. Easy. But what's the net of this? An elevated total toxin and antigenic burden, which then leads to systemic disease. Food is in the middle of this, guys. This is your gut, altered intestinal permeability. And that's, now we're going to kind of peel away at this, but this is begin with the end in mind, right? Okay. Gut microbiome alterations, gut barrier functions associated with post-immune homeostasis in COVID-19 patients. What you're seeing is obviously, some people are getting wicked diarrhea from the current variant, wicked diarrhea. But a big piece to this is we thought that this was just a big cytokine disruptor like IL-6. What if you read the current papers being published, it actually upregulates the complement pathway. And the complement pathway is a little more work to get back online. There's a lot to be done for that. Neuropathy in COVID-19 associated with dysbiosis related inflammation. Are you having people post-COVID that are saying, man, my fingers are tingling. Why are my feet numb? It is because the microbiota alters kenurinin pathway. So you remember the 2,3-IDO pathway that we all learned in functional medicine? 2,3-IDO pathway, quinolinic acid, kenurinic acid gets upregulated in the presence of inflammation, especially if you're an MTHFR gene SNP. Oh my God, you got to get methylfolate on. Right? Right? That's what we learned. So, but the reality is this, we know that this, and why is this? Because with the triggering of systemic inflammation, the 2,3-IDO pathway gets altered, and now my kynurenate and quinolinic acid is altered, leading to neuropathies and mood changes, depressions, all right? So another issue, and I can't help but go through this. This isn't going to be a pandemic lecture, but I can't help but point this out because guess what? You know what you're going to be seeing the next 5 years? A lot of people with very disturbed guts due to this. And we're all thinking, oh my God, it's COVID brain fog. Got it. But you know what? That brain fog is also associated with the fact that you've got an enteric nervous system. And when the gut is upregulated and you then become, you have a leaky blood-brain barrier because of it, now I'm triggering that microglial activation, which then of course is causing that, like pushing a thought through jello feeling, right? So this is pretty interesting. We lose short chain fatty acids biosynthesis. So you're going to need to work hard at getting butyrate production back up in these individuals. And then, like isoleucine biosynthesis goes down. Why do we care about that? What's so important about isoleucine anyway? I can't even spell it. What's the importance of isoleucine? It's an essential amino acid. Okay. And come on, it's a branched chain amino acid. What do you use branched chain amino acids? In your muscle. So what are we going to end up with? We're going to end up with insulin resistant people down-regulating their anabolic drive, layering muscle into their fat, which is one of the biggest things that drives inflammation because of all of that fat. All right. And this is, this was it's kind of old, February 2022. So you've got to get on top of this because you're going to have a lot of people that are going to need this work, and you're going to have to start foundationally at that epithelial cell. Because guess what? How am I going to get people to absorb their nutrients and rebuild them? How's it going to happen? So, obviously this is the whole process, right? If you look here, commensal symbiotes go down, opportunistic pathogens are up. We get a leaky gut or a permeable, enhanced permeability in the gut. And what's that mean? Bacterial translocation of dysbiotic flora. And that means I'm going to upregulate my antigen presenting cells. And that means I'm going to put a lot of pressure on my Th2 side of my immune system. And oh, by the way, my T killer cells and natural killer cells have been incapacitated by this particular bug, right? This is what's going on. This is our reality. And this is just, I just wanted to I just want to really emphasize this, once again, gut dysbiosis, increased risk of infection. So people that end up that are normal weight, do you know anybody with normal weight that has gut problems? Yeah. Right? It's really common. So it isn't just, yes, people that are overweight, people that are hypertensive, people that are pre-diabetic, diabetic, autoimmune. I got it. They're the real super high risk people because it's obvious. But people of normal weight who already have dysbiosis, think about the process that's occurring in these individuals when they get exposed. And once again, short chain fatty acids in the gut microbiota gets significantly reduced. So you need to have strategies, whether it's I'm going to have them use ghee, I'm going to have them do glutamine, I'm going to have them do resistant starch to build their butyrate capacity. However you want to think about it, right? I'm not here to tell you, oh, there's only one way to get that. I'm just telling you, you need to focus on rebuilding that short chain fatty acid synthesis. And you can measure that, right? You guys measure butyrate. You can measure it and find out, am I getting somewhere? This is just more of the same. We can get by that. So our new reality is this. Look for more than gut-related issues as your cause for your problem, for their gut problems. Meaning, yes, I have irritable bowel. Yes, I have SIBO. Yes, I have colitis. Got it. Go beyond the gut, right? You have to understand the gut. You got to work on it. You got to get the foods that are offending out to decrease the chronic inflammation that's in there. And then you have to look at metabolic inflammation triggering issues that defy those gut issues, and then increase that C3 testing. You need this because in particular, what's happening in our post-pandemic world is and I know you guys have seen this. If you're running the test, you're seeing more C3 complement, and you're asking people post-COVID, and are you seeing it or no? Yes.
MC convert, so like you clear IgE, IgG, that's on the next one testing, it's just a C3D.
Right. Yeah.
Why?
Well, it's the other side of the, it's a different, we'll get to that. We'll get to that. So now let's just kind of, that introduction was just kind of beginning with the end in mind. Now we're going to peel back a little bit and just kind of go through food allergies real quickly and then get to where else they bridge, because you have to look at cardiometabolic issues in a big way. You have to look at nervous system issues in a big way. Because if you don't, you're like the old problem with food allergy in general. I'm just going to tell you in the past, big, in my opinion, the big problem with food allergy testing was always, well, gee, people just end up with new allergens. They test and they're getting reactive to the new foods that they're eating. So they feel better from relieving the old foods they were eating, but then they get reactive to new foods. That should be telling you you're missing something. In general, the reds and yellows should be going away. It may take you time, because on the C3 complement, you may have to use more advanced therapies like peptides to reset that C3 complement. Or even things like plant sterols and steroids can reset the C3 complement. But all I'm saying is, what you want to look for is progression. Am I moving the needle on this person? And you know what? I know we want to try and help every person. Sometimes you got a case where it just isn't happening for you. Well, and you're just gonna have to dig in a little harder. You got to dig in harder and look a little deeper. So obviously we know the difference between allergies and sensitivities, right? Oh my gosh, I got an IgE, so I have anaphylaxis. Pretty easy to determine anaphylaxis, right? It's, people stop breathing pretty quick. But the sensitivity piece is a big one, right? Because for a lot of people who are eating all the time, probably one of the best examples, a woman came in, she's like 52 years old. She had this hip pain. She's like, I have to get my hip replaced. Okay. I'm not the guy to see for that. I don't do hip replacements. What do you want me to do? Well, I like to do that before the surgery. Okay. Well, we did a food allergy panel on her. It started working on her gut and getting her to sleep at night. She was on 2 different sleep meds, still waking up in the middle of the night, which tells you that her melatonin cycling is off. And she's under a lot of stress. Straighten out the stress, get the gut right. Guess what? Doesn't need a hip surgery. You guys see this all the time. You get the inflammation to go away. Now I don't need to have hip surgery. So, yeah, but it was a sensitivity. It wasn't an allergy in her case. It was food sensitivities. So she would eat them. And then she would go out and hike a day later or 2 days later, and all that inflammation would spool up. And she'd be like, oh my God, I got to get this done. I need to get in. I have to have a ultrasound guided injection of PRP. But sometimes, it's that old story. Sometimes you bring out a hammer when you need a feather. Yeah. But in many cases, here's the other piece is the trouble. You've got some people that maybe they don't want to change the way they eat. And so then that's why they do need more heroic interventions, right? That's why there's a place for all that. Okay. Come on.
That was
They're like,
I'll tell you. I know what it is. It's the ice that was on the runways yesterday is in your computer.
yeah.
That's Texas ice last night. 15 million something from IgE. I think there's probably more than that. You guys test it. You got people who have IgE, they just haven't fully expressed their allergic response. They don't look at their eczema, they don't look at their psoriasis and think, oh, it's IgE. 20% of the population alter their diet due to a perceived adverse food reaction. 20% of people on their own will do it. And what's the big difference? Obviously, over here with sensitivities, it's not life-threatening typically, but it does make people miserable. It can change their mood. It can trigger inflammatory signaling. While on this side of the equation, this is somewhat immediate, right? I need an EpiPen. So allergies versus sensitivities, a much more quick reaction in most cases. This is many times a more self-limiting reaction, but one that still triggers a lot of inflammatory chemistry in an individual. And so when you look at this, the sensitization that occurs, and it's all about these APC cells, right? It's once I get a leaky barrier, once my barrier is leaky, now there's an opportunity for, either a true allergen, something that's inhaled, or a food to then get through the cell. Now, it's one thing that it goes here, right? This is kind of the transcellular uptake. But then remember, these cells are breaking down. People have chronic allergies. You get the disruption of the lamina propria gets attacked. The epithelial cell gets flattened out, right? And now it makes it real easy for things like broccoli or cashews or, oh my gosh, how could I be allergic to avocados, right? You hear that. And so the net of it is that when we present to these antigen-presenting cells, we upregulate this IgE epitope, and which then leads to this histamine leukotriene. It's interesting. Everybody's like, oh, I've got a mast cell disorder. Cytosis. If you really look at what's going on, and there's been some pretty interesting papers, it's more genetic. It's more that they've upregulated their histamine genes. And it's not just mast cells that are releasing that histamine. It's a more global phenomena that's going on. But regardless, what happens is we, with this response, we increase histamine leukotrienes and cytokines. And here's a great thing to look at. You see basophils? How many of you guys look at basophils as a big marker, right? Greater than one or greater is you're upregulating IL-6. So basophils are simple, or I've taught it for years. Just look at percent monocytes, eosinophils, and basophils. And what does that look like? It's a simple thing that you can do. That's what happens when you do that. It negates this. Okay? You have to hit it again. Do a slide for me. And this is, I love this slide because it's not complicated. Right? This is beautiful. This is a healthy gut, which somebody has. I mean, I thought that pink stuff, remember amoxicillin, bubblegum flavored? I thought that was part of my meal plan because I got it so much as a kid growing up. because my dad would feed me dairy every night. He would bring home because he worked long hours as a chef before it was cool to, be a chef. They were working a lot of hours for little money. He'd bring me home a milkshake or a hot fudge sundae every night because that's the way he could show love. And I had infections and sinus problems and tonsil issues my whole time that I was a child. And so I lived on, so the pink stuff you got during the day, and twice a day you got the purple stuff, Dimetapp. I love the taste of Dimetapp. Right? But so, I live this, I get it. So the point being is these tight junctions are now disrupted, this leaky or permeable gut. If you look here, antibiotics, autoimmunity, a diet that's poor, dysbiosis due to either exposure or due to diet and lifestyle. Look, you can just train too much and get dysbiosis. Think of runner's diarrhea, right? You hear about endurance athletes having, irritable bowels, or they develop reactive airways. Why do you think that happens? Excessive cytokine response to excessive training. And then of course down here, infection, low stomach acid, NSAIDs. I would put proton pump inhibitors are a major cause of gut dysbiosis. Stress, toxins, get the leaky gut. This obviously gets compromised. Now we start to get this increase in both pathogens and foods into our bloodstream, and then we start to create a lot of immunologic drive, both in the gut and in the bloodstream. Next one. Okay. So people go, I remember back when I was talking, gosh, in Cincinnati, when I had a clinic in Cincinnati, and we were seeing 300 or 400 people a week, so we were seeing a couple people. And I had the head of General Electric's medical division was my medical partner. I had the chief science officer for Procter & Gamble, top MRI guy publishing. We were all partners in this big facility where you could do everything from imaging studies to fitness to rehab to nutrients, right? It was a massive, really big facility, 50,000 square feet. And when I would talk about leaky gut back in like 2003, they'd be like, leaky gut, there's Swiss cheese. That's what it looks like in your gut. And there weren't a lot of studies back then. I mean, honestly, back in 2003, you were, it was a couple of paper clips, some bubble gum and some twine to prove that there was, leaky gut, right? But now we have something called electron microscopy. And look at the gut. This is what your gut barrier should look like. This is what the cilia should look like. See how nice and tight those are? This was a study, this is a 2018 study on microbiota dysbiosis and barrier dysfunction in inflammatory bowel disease and colorectal cancers. See that gut? That's a gut that's broken down. See all the cracks and crevices? It is Swiss cheese, after all. You see these? Look at the gapping. So everybody wonders, can you really get food allergies? Well, guess what? It's real that people get permeability of their gut. It's real that they react to peptides from foods, as well as dyes and artificial ingredients, along with inhalants, right? But have you guys ever seen the pictures of this? Have you guys seen pictures of electron microscopy of the gut? It's kind of cool, right? And some people haven't seen those before. And I just think it's fascinating. It's like, yeah, look at my brush border. Look how broken down it is. Move it. Need to hit it again. Whoop, go back. Now move forward. There we go. So IgE and IgG, obviously I already kind of went through that. IgE is more immediate, leads to a lot of symptoms, a lot of atopic symptoms, obviously things like wheezing. And I'll tell you the big one for me is how many people complain of clearing their throat. You're sitting in there with them during your interview with them, and they're clearing mucus out of their throat. That's one of the simplest things that it's a habit. So, and I track that on people. As soon as I pick up on it, I'm like, oh, okay, are you clearing your throat as much? Oh, you know what? No, I'm not clearing my throat. My spouse says I'm not clearing my throat. And then, of course, IgE, there's delayed reaction. We kind of talked to this already. You need this whole chronic inflammation. And go ahead. This isn't kind of working. IgG4. Why is IgG4 important? Because what it's doing is trying to neutralize that IgE epitope, right? You have IgG4 trying to dampen IgE response. So when you see somebody with a really high IgG4, and look, there are conditions and diseases now associated with elevated IgG4. So IgG4 is basically there blooming because it's trying to protect you against a mounted IgE response. All right. So that's when you see that IgG4, you're going, oh my gosh, a lot of IgG4. This is also this is what drives a lot of autoimmunity. All right. And then of course, C3 creates a massive IgG response. So if you have an IgG response, if your C3 complement is upregulated, and I just gave you a reason why a lot of people are going to have C3 complement upregulation in the next 3 to 5 years, it creates a 10,000-fold increase in that immunologic drive that occurs on IgG. So C3 is pretty important to characterize, especially in today's world. And so when you look at C3BD, the reason that that's valuable is you're getting 2 different subsets of C3. And so once again, what's the importance? It's a blocking antibody. It's supposed to inhibit mast cells and basophils, but if it's going really high, it's telling you something is causing inflammatory signaling. And so when you look at this, this is like, so when you look at the complement cascade, of course, important. So I've already kind of went through this. You get this C3BD IgG complex. This is where you create this upregulation. Remember, high levels of IgG leads to IgG-related diseases. They're in the literature now. If you looked at the literature 12 years ago, so if you're somebody that looked something up, oh, I just Googled IgG4. It said that IgG4 has nothing to do with anybody getting sick. Look at the year of the study. People will read it and they'll go, oh, it's 2004. If you look at any of the recent literature, it is associated with a wide array of autoimmune and chronic conditions. I'm more interested in IgG4 when I do that test. I mean, IgG4 and C3 to me are even more important than IgE and IgG, the way I look at them. But I like to see all of it, right? So IgG4 related diseases, here you go. Autoimmune, plasmacystic syndromes. This whole thing of the sialadenitis, this whole piece here leads to things like, actually can end up leading to things like lupus. Thyroid disease, lung disease, pharyngitis, pancreatitis, prostatitis. This was all 2018 on IgG4 related illnesses. I kind of went through this as it's a big indicator, not just for the allergen exposure, but how ramped up the immune system has become. I've kind of pushed on this already that C3 dramatically amplifies the response, right? So if you have a C3, that food you really want to try to avoid. Now, if somebody's lit up on C3 almost everywhere because of their post-COVID exposure, you're going to have to push really hard at modulating your immune system. So, what's a really interesting herb? You can be the student that gets the platinum star. Because you get this right, you can come up here and teach. I'm going to go sit down. What is an herb that was, I'm going to give you hints, that was used in the Bible that is fantastic at regulating the C3 complement pathway?
Frankincense.
Well, yeah. I gave you the Bible thing. I could have said what was in Campo medicine and thrown you off. Of course, it wouldn't have been in Campo medicine, but yeah. I never said I was fair as an educator. So developing C3BD and signaling. So what's going on here? We get this danger sensing response. Where's this danger sensing? See, oh, you see this C1Q? That gets dramatically upregulated in people with COVID. And when you upregulate C1Q, what happens is your danger response gets amplified. If you guys are familiar with Navio's work, if you're familiar with Navio's work at University of San Diego, so he's talking about cell danger response signaling and kind of the genomics of what starts to happen when you start to create this chronic inflammatory response. It all kind of starts with this danger signaling. If you look up here, altered cell, apoptotic cells, microbes, exogenous danger, meaning what am I getting exposed to? I'm upregulating the C3 complement pathway, and that's what we're looking for. Of course, here, when you look at C3A, what do you think of? Things like lupus, things like biotoxins, the whole C3A, C4A upregulation that occurs. But this is being amplified in people now that really previously maybe didn't have it as much. And so as soon as we see the C3 MBD signaling, you really need to start to look into, well, how am I going to calm down this complement path activation? What's the test look like? Obviously, when you look at these tests, you see IgG or IgE, IgG4, C3BD, right? So what am I looking for? I'm obviously looking for REMS. And that's the obvious. When you look at the test, and I know you're going to have break and you guys have folders, so you've got all kinds of time to talk to the crew that's here from Infinite. But for me, this is really effective, right? Because as soon as I see red, people go, oh, red's bad. Red's bad, green's good. And yellow, I better put the brakes on, right? So depending on how far off an individual is, like how much autoimmunity or sickness is driven in this individual, the more ill, the way I look at it, the more symptoms, the more ill they are, the more they need to follow the strict guidelines that are given, meaning the bigger food list, which I'll show you in a second. So here's a great example. Well, you read all the time. Well, of course you do. Look, IgG is elevated. They've got a C3BD. So whenever they're eating this, they're getting a massive amplification of their immune response, right? And look, we know it's, we just can't say it's tough. Don't you have people that go to Europe, they go to Italy, they eat a pizza, they don't have any problems, and then they're mad at you for the next 30 days. How come I can eat wheat? Yeah, because it's non-hybridized, right? Do you know where they grow their wheat? You know where Italy gets their wheat? Somebody tell me.
Russia.
I made nice call. No, I think that's where they get their potatoes. It's Arizona. A lot of Arizona ancient grain wheat is all bought and sent to Europe. Yeah, wow. We get all the stuff that's sprayed and hybridized. Yeah, it's kind of crazy. So when you get these, and everybody asks me, oh my God, if you have aspergillus, does that mean you have a biotoxin? Well, you might think that, oh, okay, I'm sensitive to a mold. Look, guys, I just got to tell you that one of the big misconceptions, you don't have mold growing in your body. When you do a urine mycotoxin test, you're testing the food that you ate. You're not testing for mold. It's the food that you ate. It was developed in third world countries to look at mold in food. You have to test for the inflammatory response. So yes, is this maybe a problem? Yeah, but then you got to go through the whole thing that Dr. Crozier's going to talk about this afternoon, which you guys are in for a huge treat because Gordon's colleague of mine really gets into, has been treating folks with SEERs and biotoxin illness for a long time. So my point is yes, you can get some insight with this, or I tested for Candida. Does that mean I'm riddled with Candida? Well, it could just mean that you had a previous Candida exposure that was big. But one easy way is just, oh, could you stick your tongue out? Oh, it's white and coated and thick. Sure, yeah, you've got Candida. Oh, and we're going to go through that in a little bit. So the next piece did they get a break at all?
No.
I'm just going,
You're going till 12.
just keep going.
Yeah.
If anybody has to go to the bathroom, too bad. Nobody leaves,
There's
lock
no
the
time.
doors. All right, so I'm gonna give you a little bit of spin, and this actually came because of our conversation. Elise and I were talking, and I was like, I just feel like it is way underappreciated that we are not managing people's stress. So I'm gonna ask a question. And I honestly, I don't get stressed. My staff has always told me I just give it. So I don't really have that issue. I decided to be giving. No, I thought, why not be giving? Right? But I don't think it makes me popular. But if I'm just gonna ask, how many of you feel, and raise your hand really high, even you folks in the audience that I can't see, make sure you're raising your hand. How many people feel overcommitted in their day? Raise your hand. Not anyone? I like this. Everybody does this.
Kids are in college, 7.
The kids are in college. Well, I don't know. That made me stressed out when I was in college. Like, all right, what are they doing beer pong? What are they doing? How many of you had periods where you were overcome with anxiousness over life events? Raise your hand. All right. Well, I love it. Now, if I ask a positive question, you know what happens? So this is what we're really dealing with. So when I work with special forces, because I educate special forces medical staff, and they have some special forces folks, this is what it's all about. It's about, think about these terms. If you're really trying to get somebody better, it's about durability, resilience, and capacity. Think of those terms. So when I talk to people, I talk about, we're going to build your metabolic reserve. We're going to build your resiliency. We're going to build your metabolic capacity. Because guess what? The building of that capacity is what allows you to overcome life crisis events, right? So perceived stress, threat, feeling of helplessness, hypervigilance, and remember, and this is just out of Marianne Legato's work out of Columbia, women actually have a stronger fight or flight response than men. You think men would be, because they're the ones that got to go out there and, we're supposed to, hunter-gatherer thing, it's actually women light up the areas in the brain much quicker to fight or flight response, which makes sense because you see more women with irritable bowel, more women with anxiety, more, right? Now you could say, well, yeah, maybe men are afraid to admit it. It's actually an issue where I work on the amygdala on women a lot more. Herbs like kava that dampen the amygdala response are pretty valuable because that amygdala center is what really gets fired up. And so when I have this perceived stress, and this happens in men too, right? My fight or flight, and so fight or flight, how many people have a smartwatch? Anybody have a smartwatch? You wear a smartwatch? How many of you track your heart rate? Track your heart rate. 3 people in a room track your heart rate. 4. All right. You need to track your heart rate, guys. You don't need to do it to become a super athlete. If your resting heart rate's above 62, every 4 points above 62 indicates a 7 to 10% increased risk of cardiometabolic disease.
Really?
For real. Sorry.
You have a reference for that?
I have plenty. They're coming up. Good. I want you to change.
Just raise the heart rate.
Wait, I am freaked out right now. I'm super freaked out. Let me see. Oh my God, I'm cranking right now. I've got a 53. So the point being is you need to, everybody's talking about heart rate variability. When COVID patients, what happened to them post-COVID? POTS. They get autonomias because their nervous system is now dysregulated. So when we get these behavioral issues, diet, smoking, drinking, exercise, infection, we change our allostasis, meaning I no longer am able to adapt to the stress. Instead, my brain starts a new method, and that's changing hormones, neurochemicals, becoming sympathetic dominant, altering hormone expression, increasing sympathetic tone. When I increase sympathetic tone, what happens to your immune system? Do you make better T killer cells and natural killer cells when you're stressed out? No, they become adolescent. They never mature. So it is really important to, help people with behavior. I can't tell you how many people I'm teaching just something simple like, hey, I'm not going to tell you to do mindfulness, or it's pretty bad when a watch has to tell you to breathe. Right? Oh, it's time to do your deep breathing. Guess what? Our diaphragm's supposed to be freed up, and we're supposed to breathe pretty deep all the time. It's a big deal. I teach a lot of people box breathing because a lot of them are so stressed out to begin with. If I asked them to do 20 minutes of mindfulness, they'd be like, my day's already nutty. Can you spare me 3 minutes twice a day, do box breathing and drop that diaphragm? Yeah, I can do that. Okay. And you know what ends up happening? They start going, I do that whenever I start to feel stressed. Yes, if they could do a practice of yoga. Yes, if they could do a practice of mindfulness. I get it. I would love it. But a lot of times I just got to grab 5 minutes out of people and unload their sympathetic dominance. Box breathing will do that. You guys are familiar with box breathing? 4 seconds in, hold 4 seconds, 4 seconds out, hold 4 seconds. On the exhale, you're releasing your stress of the day. What is it that's upsetting you? Letting it go. And then at the end of that 3 minutes, what are you supposed to do? What do you seal it with? Gratitude. Right on. Exactly. You end it in gratitude. And guess what? People start changing the way they think and feel. 3 minutes twice a day, especially if your heart rate's high. It is going to be doing work. This is old school, right? But it's still there. It's very advocated. You're going. So gut-immune brain, what is it? Gut-immune brain axis. That's what we're going to talk about right now. It's primary command and control. It's a filtering, defense, and repair mechanism. It's the major physiologic interface. Gut, immune, brain. Gut, brain, enteric nervous system, the blood-brain barrier, the epithelial cells of the gut. A major physiologic interface. And when it's normal, it's organized and secure. And when it's imbalanced, it's disordered and unbreakable. And what are you talking about? Well, how about a woman that has anxiety and she has irritable bowel? Did she ever go into any place where she's not looking for the bathroom? Is she wondering if she's going to make it home? That's kind of disordered and unpredictable. So tell me, how do you settle that nervous system down? Right? Yeah, kava. Exactly. Bathe in it. Do kava cocktail parties. That was really popular. So obviously, you've got this whole aspect of the lamina propria, the epithelial cells. We have all this immune interaction. Of course, the M cells being incredibly important for our memory of infection. So if you're thinking about what's really good to upregulate M cells, beta-1,3-glucan. I know I throw these bombs out at you. There's no slides on it. So if you're really interested in upregulating M cells, I give people, if they do choose to vaccinate, no judgment one way or the other. I'm just saying, if you are going to vaccinate, you want to use beta-1,3-glucan beforehand because you're going to upregulate the M cells.
What's the dose?
500 milligrams 3 times a day. Beta-1,3-glucan. Beta-1,3,6-glucan, really good for upregulating your M cells. Or if you get an infection, you remember it better. So, yes.
Do you know any known products that would support that?
There's a bunch of beta-1,3-glucans, honestly.
Immunomed 3-6 is one that I happen to know.
Yeah, good. So she could tell you at break. There's a bunch. So the mucosal lining of the intestine is incredibly important. And remember, the mucosal lining of the intestine is dependent on short-chain fatty acids. So yes, you make mucin. You stimulate the production of mucin by what? Probiotics. The microbiota and the ingestion of resistant starch, right? So one of the ways you can make resistant starch is you can block some of that starch digestion. I know some of this stuff, I've got designed products over the years that it's great that it helps people to lose weight, but what I really like about it is it upregulates resistant starch. Now you can take resistant starch, just take a resistant starch. You can eat lots of leafy greens, artichokes, those kind of things, right? Good for you, get that resistant starch. Even cooked and cooled potatoes are high in resistant starch, right? So a lot of ways to get resistant starch, but the way you do this is flora, it's ghee, it's resistant starch. So how many people do hormone replacement therapy in the room? You do hormone replacement. Great. How many people require 40 grams of fiber in their patients in order for you to continue giving them hormone replacement therapy? Gordon does, I know. If you don't have enough fiber, what's going to happen? And in fact, it's easy, right? You could get rid. Elizabeth, I know the therapies that you do on people, and you could get 100 boxes of resistant starch for some of the therapies that they cost a lot on people, right? So fiber is one of the cheapest ways to inhibit beta-glucuronidase, and you're going to circulate estrogen. And when you have beta-glucuronidase, you're going to break this down. Fiber, guys. Fiber. If you're doing hormones, it should be a requirement. Don't come back to me with a full jar of your fiber. I know, I've been on my soapbox on that for about a decade. I'm never going to get off of it. So you guys just get used to it. I'm going to keep pounding on it. And of course, the big thing to keep in mind that basically you should have very little lymphocytic activity in your mucosal tissue. And when it gets upregulated, that's when you know you've got a problem. And of course, the tight junctions in the zonulin, you can measure zonulin. We're gonna, really important to think about looking at zonulin. How does zonulin get affected? 1, by infection, 2, by stress, 3, by anything that upregulates inflammatory cytokines. You'll upregulate zonulin and you'll break the clathroid cage, right? It's proteins that are just the most delicately held together. Right? Once that happens, so if we see here just excess lymphocytes damage tight junctions. How am I getting these lymphocytes upregulated? Reactions to food, environmental burden. TH2 activation upregulated with this lymphocyte activity. If you look here, there should be low in the microvilli. Once it starts to go up, obviously we start to see these kind of issues, as in, for example, in celiac. But anybody that's HLA upregulated, so if they've got HLA gene SNPs, right, DQ2, DQ8, on measuring you for biotoxins. Oh, you don't have biotoxins, but you've got these DRDQ gene SNPs, the HLA family, right? Oh, if you've got those, and you're eating gluten, you're at about 100-fold risk of developing type 1 diabetes if you're a young child or an infant, right? It's, once again, I just go off of the literature. It's not, none of this stuff's my opinion. Well, maybe a little. So this is that whole thing. See, HLA class 1 and 2, both getting upregulated, which then drives these inflammatory macrophages and downregulates the anti-inflammatory macrophage. So you upregulate your pro-inflammatory macrophages. Now, why am I going into this? Because what starts causing heart disease, which is still our #1 killer? Inflammatory macrophages, right? It's an immune issue. So once again, a lot of different organizational issues happen, and we develop these autoimmune disorders. Immunity to bacteria, immunity to parasites, immunity to bugs, all good. When we break this down, we start to upregulate our neutrophils, and we start to create more pressure on our immune system. This is where people start to get sick. Are we seeing a big upswing in autoimmune disorders? Yes or no? Dramatic, right? It's like amazing how much more autoimmunity is going on. So the result of gut dysbiosis, I kind of just list them. You guys can read that. Factors involved in gut immune dysregulation. I just want to re-emphasize this. You have perfect example. The guy just died here in Florida. Doctor, 49 years old, endurance runner. Got COVID, stroke. Got COVID a second time, stroked again and died. Right? Overtraining. right? I'm telling you right now, one of the biggest things that assessing individuals for overtraining, look at flattening of their cortisol curve, look at their sleep pattern disturbances, look at their mean platelet volume. You guys look at mean platelet volume as the metainflammation index, MPV. If MPV is in the upper third quartile to out of bounds, like upper third quartile, fourth quartile out of bounds, third quartile will be mounting metabolic inflammation. MPV, everybody just blows by it. And there's papers on it that show that MPV is a absolute indicator of metabolic inflammation. But you got to cast your net wide and build your case, right? So these are the issues, right? Effects of dysregulation and far-reaching autoimmune disease. Obviously, it's all over it. Now, before I go on to the next part, anything I came up with here that you guys are going, oh God, I'm scratching my head. Go ahead.
So I just want your opinion on something. So whether you are naturally exposed to COVID, even if you were asymptomatic and acquired antibodies, or you received the vaccine, in either case, you're exposed to the spike
Antigen,
protein,
the spike protein.
which is an antagonist to those, especially to the epithelial cells, and you just presented that slide. So even for those of us who had COVID but weren't symptomatic but have antibodies, we're just as likely to be susceptible to this as well.
You could be. You're probably less susceptible because you didn't have as many symptoms, so you managed your cytokine response and therefore did not create as much pressure on your gut because of that inflammatory response. So if you didn't, I mean, obviously you'd want to look around, right? Do some testing and kind of see, hey, is there any kind of effect from that? But the more symptoms you felt, and think of it, how many people have you seen that have had gut problems during their infection or post? It's a lot of them, right? I mean, and just because you get their poop back to normal, right? Because everybody kind of goes, oh yeah, I'm pooping normal again, every other day, whatever. Just because you get just because they get back to their normal GI habit doesn't mean immunologically it's been corrected. So you kind of want to dig in deep to that.
Right. So basically, I'm just saying, getting back to with the spike protein being an antagonist to inflammation, and then you have in terms of again epithelial cells, really there's so much susceptibility to autoimmune because of the exposure, whether you are asymptomatic or not.
Yeah. Sure. Well, I would say that you're less likely if you're completely asymptomatic, you got over it quickly, you feel good, you're less likely to have that process going on, but you probably want to monitor your neutrophils, percent monocytes, eosinophils, basophils, MPV. Yes. Look at, markers like maybe TGF-1. Look around a little bit in your immune system. I had it. 4 days, got it, out and, used antibodies and great. But the point being is, I think if you are really asymptomatic and you feel good post-COVID, probably your immune system handled the spike protein, regulated the inflammatory response. You didn't deplete your NAD. Why does everybody feel better from NAD when they do it? Why? Because COVID depletes your NAD to NADH ratio goes down. Then you upregulate PPAR, and that PPAR activation is what keeps you in an inflammatory response. So it's important to kind of step back and go, where am I at? Am I fatigued post? Is my gut, do I have a lot of, signs of, immune response? Do I have neuropathy? My neighbor 3 doors up came down to me and he's like, my fingers are tingling and my feet are tingling after my COVID. Right, you have a post-COVID neuroinflammation induced by dysbiosis. It's published, it's there, and people are going to tell you that, right? So it's really just important. So I think you just have to, with everybody, that's why I brought this up. I think looking around, if people have become sensitive to foods when they weren't sensitive before they got infection, is kind of important. because you're going to knock down that C3 response, the mounting IgG4 response, while you're doing therapies that are correcting what got shifted due to that SARS-CoV-2 infection, right?
Basically, what I was kind of saying, you were just addressing the fact that there's such an uptick in autoimmune, well, we're gonna have even more. Period.
Oh yeah, remember what I said about what you're going to be dealing with the next 3 to 5 years? This is what you read between the lines beautifully. I think it's happening. It's happening. Yep, I'll get you to Ron. Go ahead.
It's happening in relation to the vaccine or naturally getting COVID or both?
Oh, so I knew somebody's going to ask that. Well, I mean, look, you're still getting the same response, and look at the subset of adverse events. And I'm telling you guys, you aren't going to get me to sit on one side of the fence on this thing. So I'm just telling you, but if you looked at the adverse events like myocarditis, which is driven by inflammatory cytokine storms, you need to be watching for post-COVID vaccination and booster autoimmune and inflammatory responses that are going to express themselves, even though you may have, especially if you're on beta-1,3 glucan, when you got that vaccination, you may have better M cell uptake and you're able to have that better antibody response due to that COVID exposure that you got. So, is that clear?
No.
Or maybe even be clear. When you take that shot, are you inducing a measure of inflammatory response?
Yes.
That inflammatory response is going to do what to your gut?
Open up the gap further.
Exactly. You just answered for me. So he has all the opinions on it, not me. He just answered. So. But no, that's exactly right.
I have a defined opinion, but I don't.
No, what I'm.
But I would love
The
to.
defined, look, I think this is way bigger than any one brain.
Mhm.
So all I'm saying is, by default, when you trigger an inflammatory process, look, take COVID out of it. Make it another bug. When you have a sustained cytokine response that triggers metabolic inflammation, by default, your gut is going to be damaged. Now, when I do a vaccination, I'm mimicking somewhat that infection, right? That's how our body is working. It's mimicking it. It's good. It's good. Fine. Okay. We have people that are at high risk that probably need to have that done. I get it. So you're still turning on the same mechanisms. So you should be watching for autoimmunity, gut issues on all fronts on individuals, vaccinated or not. Just because of the science. I'm not, once again, I'm not here to argue one side or the other. I'm just saying that in the end, the gut is getting broken down in most cases, because guess what? The people that are experiencing these last 2 years that haven't seen their family members, that haven't been going to work, that aren't socializing, the kids, all of it, the amount of stress they're under is disrupting their gut dramatically. Alone, right?
Can you repeat? I missed what you were saying about greater than 62 beats per minute.
Oh no, I got that coming. Don't worry about that. It's coming. You got slides on.
What was that? Every 4 points above that was
7 to 10% increase in cardiometabolic risk.
okay. Thank you.
Hey, Jim, I'm getting requests for a 5-minute bio break.
That's what I was hoping for. I just, I'm good. Bio break. Let's hit it. See, you can think of peptides like thymosin beta-4, boswellia, and of course, just taking the pressure off. But those are specific.
There's some question online. Here.
What's that?
There's some questions.
Questions?
Yeah.
What? Okay.
In the chat.
Great. Here we go.
What is it?
How many debate do you know about what does intestinal radiation do to GI metabolism or? So, yeah, if you're doing GI radiation, it kills the microbiome. That's for sure. How would you do to cure or fix the gut lining destruction due to radiation? Same thing, glutamine, butyrate. Cat's claw is amazing for down-regulating inflammation in the gut. Resistant starch, ghee, zinc carnosine. Those are just some key things. I can go through it a little more thoroughly for people.
There was like
What was that?
like the fight and flight. I think so they were asking.
Fight or flight?
Yeah.
Does anyone hear the name of the researcher, women stronger, fight or flight? Legato.
I think in the slide it said this.
McEwen slide, that's not the right name. I don't know what that is for, whatever.
The fight or flight. The fight or flight. I think.
Yeah, but I don't know what you're saying. No, McEwen. That's legato. Gender specific, I think it was gender specific message. Just do a read, just do a lip search. Look at fight or flight response to men and women and hit button. Honestly, it's the quickest way to get to it.
I think that's it.
Cool.
Thanks.
Good. All right.
Awesome.
Perfect. Oh, you get it? No, that's good. That's a good question. MPV, you're going to get on any, right? Any red blood cell. Your metabolic panel and CBC, you get it. EPL. Oh, doing pellets.
Anything else?
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
I'm just concerned.
Well, first of all, what's to that in that person, because if they have, the problem when you put hormones in like pellets and people that have like high metabolic inflammation, it tends to drive, especially we may have like different gene SNPs for blood clot factoring. It really can put them at risk for blood clots. So,
You're just a wealth of information.
oh, thank you.
Tell me about, we're doing, hormone replacement. Tell me the fiber thing again.
Well, the reason fiber is important is that when people eat diets of either high sat fat, low sugar, or high carb, and they don't have enough fiber, fiber is what manages the microbiota so that you regulate beta-glucuronidase activity. So
Okay.
beta-glucuronidase gets upregulated in low fiber diets. And beta-glucuronidase is what attaches the beta-glucuronide attachment to estrogen.
Okay.
So when estrogen goes through the liver, it hooks on a glucuronide. That's why people take calglucarate. And then that's the handle to carry the estrogen out of the body. But when you upregulate beta-glucuronidase, you attach the handle, and now it is stored.
So you're
It's
just
free.
recommending everybody, male or female,
Should be on fiber if they're
what
doing
kind of
hormone
fiber? You
I
recommend?
like guargum is good. If you just want to do food, flaxseed is really good. But I don't do flaxseed oil capsules. You do the real flax seeds.
The real flaxseed.
Yeah, do real flax seeds if you want to do it food based. Yeah, but guargum, the sun fiber is a really good fiber for that.
Guargum.
Yeah, sun, just look up sun fiber.
I will.
Sun fiber.
So that, anybody on home replacement, male, female, that's gonna be something that's gonna,
Super important. Think about how many men you see with estrogens that start getting crazy, right? Oh, we got to give you an estradiol. It's an estradiol
yeah,
deficiency.
they're all getting Arimidex,
Yeah, right.
but this will be better.
Well, it helps a
In
lot.
conjunction.
In conjunction, because you can get it out of the body. If we're on a low fiber diet and you're giving them tests and they're converting to estrogen, they're just storing the estrogen. Then you see it in 30% of your men, right? I mean, you got men that, they're not getting positive results. So what do? We go to the drug. Oh, we'll burn that estrogen out of you. You kind of need that estrogen. You need a little bit, right?
What do you think about indole 3-carbinol for women?
I like it. I use dim more, but I like the i3-6. It's fine. Yeah, I mean, it's good. Yeah. Kudzu root's really good too. All right. We having fun yet?
Yeah. Having so much fun.
Oh, I know, because it is. Aspects of your. No, it's probably, absolutely. Yep, I know, I'm tracking all that stuff. It's a habit of staying in business, to not be too controversial. Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah.
Are we done yet? Nick?
So, it's really a public. You're not supposed to live in So I think
All right. 5 minutes became 10. It's okay, not stress. Let's go to the next one. 10 should have been 5. Take it back. Here we go. So, I rode a bike an hour for the last 2 days in a row. I hadn't been riding bikes. Legs, my legs, my legs. All bikes. All right. I need to forward that slide for me. I got something to talk about. All right, here we go. Stress and the gut. So this is what we're going to go through real quick. I hope in the right direction. So when you get under stress, look, alterations in gut motility, paracellular permeability, the gut microbiota shift, you get mucosal blood flow changes. When mucosal blood flow changes, what happens? Number one thing that's going to happen. You make lipopolysaccharide because you choke out your microbiome. You reduce blood flow into your gut. So what happens to the microbiome? It can't get nutrients. So you increase lipopolysaccharide. And then you get this ulceration and visceral sensitivity. So you get a lot of that whole irritable bowel. And of course, when we upregulate stress, here's this vagus nerve. So you should be looking at things like heart rate variability. You should be looking at blood pressures and resting heart rate, because just the upregulate the inhibition actually of vagal tone will create a leaky gut. So if you're not looking at things like heart rate variability, you're missing another clue. Like you were saying, you started doing it. It's a really important. It's another clue as to what's going on with an individual's nervous system. So once again, I upregulate cortisol, I trigger the cytokines upregulate this stress. And what's one of the biggest things that generates adrenaline? So first of all, I'll ask another simple question. What's the single most inflammatory action that occurs in your body? The single most inflammatory response that occurs.
Right.
Stress is a good answer, but it's not. It's postprandial hyperglycemia. Postprandial hyperglycemia is probably the single biggest source of stress response. Yeah, it's the number one cause of heart disease. It's like the leading reason why you get endothelial dysfunction is postprandial hyperglycemia. Now, you could get hyperglycemia due to being chronic stressed, right? Because when your cortisol is high, what happens to your insulin receptors? They become sluggish. So your blood sugar goes up, right? When a diabetic gets stressed out, what happens to their blood sugars? They go up, right? So it's important to note that stress is a big one, glucose and insulin. So you got to be looking at their fasting glucose, looking at their fasting insulin to understand, well, is that contributing to that leaky gut? Right? So if you have a 95 blood sugar, you have a 60% risk of being diabetic in the next decade. And you're still in normal range, right? That's why you want to look at that's Kaiser Permanente, 46,579 lives over 10 years. Tracked.
What was that?
It's just look at it this way. 6% risk for every point above 84. 6% risk for every point above 84. That's a 10-year study on people with all normal blood sugars. And then the only way you get out of the study is if they got diabetes or died. And then so they looked at them and they basically created this, cofactor adjusted data that showed that, once you get into the mid 90s, you're already triggering that. Now, why is that important to think about? What's one of the biggest factors that insulin does to your body? Other than it makes you store fat, forget about that. What's the effect on your nervous system of insulin? First of all, do you ever see anybody that's insulin resistant or diabetic?
No.
I know, I'm being stupid. Okay, so by default, what is going on with their nervous system by default? What? starving, not getting energy,
Sympathetic dominance.
adrenaline and noradrenaline. You upregulate. That's why what happens, why do people with diabetes end up with kidney disease? Because their sympathetic dominance chokes their renal blood flow. So they start with renal hypertension, and that's why you give people ACEs and ARBs to downregulate the smooth muscle to improve blood flow to the kidneys, right? That's just conventional medicine. That's not anything, you know. So just remember, while I'm stressed out and I'm eating, you know, oh my gosh, I'm you know, eating inappropriately to drive my blood sugars. Those are the things that I can hit the next slide. I've used this slide forever, and it's because I just love this slide. I can't help it. So if you think of stress, stress could be psychogenic, it could be mechanical, it could be physical, it could be a vector. But stress triggers the HPA axis right here, HPA, allostatic load, excess cortisol, flattening of your cortisol curve over time. Cortisol induces permeability in the gut, right? But the more important sustained response is this. Hypothalamus, spinal cord, sympathetic output, through the enterochromaffin cells in the enteric nervous system, upregulating peripheral corticotropin releasing hormone that then induces permeability changes and then activates mast cells, triggering inflammation, immune activation, and antigen presentation. You see? Why do I need to deal with stress? Am I going to ever get this right if I don't deal with this up here? It's inherent. You can't detach the two. So you got to test for foods to calm down this, and you test for foods to help take the pressure off of this, to reduce the risk of this, and then you have to and you know, work on permeability, but then you got to go upstream. And some people that may not be the case. It could be like me, the guy that gives stress and doesn't take stress. I just lived on bubblegum amoxicillin the first 12 years of my life. And my gut got incredibly leaky and ended up with hives and welts the size of footballs on my legs at age 19, and, you know, and heat rash. You guys remember Hydrocord HC? Hydrocord HC was a powder, and then you poured vanishing cream in it, right? How long was a bottle of Hydrocord HC supposed to last? A couple weeks to a month. I would use 1 bottle per application. That is a very histaminic situation, right? So that's why I'm saying you can be here, meaning that you did get some kind of stress, or it can be real straightforward. I'm on a PPI, I took a bunch of antibiotics, you know, it could be that. I'm eating wrong, and that's causing your disruption. And that disruption then starts to cause anxiety, right? It can work in reverse. You could start down here and it migrate up to here, right? So you get people that are gluten sensitive that end up depressed. Obviously the celiac and psychosis and celiacs and depression and mood disorders, that's well established. But I'm talking about even sensitivities. All of a sudden you're going, why am I so jacked up? And so this is that, here we go. So how important is vagal tone? How important is heart rate variability? It is what regulates the gut-brain interface. So when I'm telling you about heart rate, what I'm telling you is that it is a major, simple thing that you can look at in individuals to find out if their immune system is under control and their brain is under control as it relates to their gut. Elevated heart rate, slightly elevated blood pressures, or even worse, low blood pressures, right? POTS. What do they have? They have low blood pressure and what for a heart rate? High. Really a lot of autonomic dysfunction going on in that situation, right? So this is what we're trying to fix. 2020 study here in the International Journal of Molecular Science. But this is what we're trying to correct right here, guys. Immune pathways, endocrine pathways, and neural pathways. I happen to think flattening of the cortisol curve is a really important pathway you got to correct. As soon as someone's got to flatten the cortisol curve, you know that their immune system's in big trouble, and probably the single biggest predictor of cardiometabolic disease, diabetes, and cancer, honestly, right? So when we think of gut, immune, brain, we can start here. I have irritable mood, my memory and focus is off because my brain's on fire, I'm getting dendritic retraction, right? My hippocampus is now shrinking. I have psychosocial stress, but it starts out with no signs. Maybe I've got some food intolerances, but I'm starting to feel things like alternating constipation, diarrhea, maybe some bloating, some maldigestion, some cramping, some reflux, maybe even some undigested food in my stool. And then it starts to go deeper, right? So when you think about where are people going with their gut, immune, brain dysfunction, right? It's getting fired up here. Known food intolerance, the beginning of pain syndrome. So I'm loading connective tissue metalloproteinases like metalloproteinase 9, metalloproteinase 3. I'm getting recurrent infections. Yeah, I'm just not getting over stuff like I used to. The gut, persistent issues. And then here, significant depression and anxiety, interrupted sleep, developing addictions, right? As the brain gets hotter and hotter, if you're a D2-allele1 gene step person, right? What are you going to do? I don't need to have that glass of wine tonight. I just want it. But I just need to want it every night. Right? And if it's not alcohol, maybe you had alcoholism in your family, and because it's ingrained in you that I am not going to become an alcoholic, right? You go home and you open up your pantry and you look, and my God, there's a bag of tortilla chips. And if you remember that, and if you remember the old cartoon, and I'm going to hug it and love it, and right? Remember that? If you're old enough to know that cartoon, you are old, right? Because I'm telling you, I'm old. But the reality is, we get people that now have an inappropriate food craving response. So what is that? That's your triggering hedonic urge. So depending on where your genetic predisposition hits, people can then start to struggle with their anxiety, with their depression, with their behaviors. And then when you start to look at, as this is moving, what are you looking at? Abnormal cortisol, maybe depressed serotonin, if that IDO pathway is a problem, right? They're not taking tryptophan, or 5-HTP is easily making serotonin, right? And then, of course, they get elevated epinephrine, elevated PEA. So PEA, phenylethylamine, right? When you're taking Concerta, you're taking phenylethylamine, basically. But elevated PEA does what? It makes you perseverate. It makes you make a list. It makes you make a list for a list. It makes you perseverate about making a list when you're laying down to go to bed, worrying about whether or not you should make a list about why you can't go to bed. Right? Elevations in histamine, incredibly important. We're going to get to that. And then, of course, we start seeing differentials. We see the known genetic predisposition of the HLA DQ2, DQ8. And then, of course, over here, what you may see in these situations where this is all kind of developing is you may not even have gut symptoms. To your point earlier, you may not have gut symptoms. You may have all immune brain symptoms and still need to work on the gut. Oh, I poop. Normal. I don't have any bloating. I don't have any gas. Now my tongue's super coated. Don't mind that. And I can't breathe through my nose. My sinuses are really congested. Don't mind that. Right? But other than that, so when we think of now let's talk about when it all gets fired up, right? So when you think about progression, I'm under stress, I'm getting exposed, I'm not eating well, I'm not exercising, or I'm exercising too much, right? I'm having my virtual happy hour daily with my friends the last 2 years. I've gained 20 pounds, right? So here's my experience. What starts to happen? we get an abnormal, either just a morning abnormal cortisol or a flattened cortisol curve or a nocturnal hypercortisolism where you get an inverted cortisol curve where you can't sleep. You have an elevated beta-2 microglobulin, which you can get that in serum. Why would you want that? Why would you want an elevated beta-2 microglobulin, which you can get on any lab test? Leaky brain. That tells you whether or not you got a leaky brain. And this could be due to biotoxins, it could be especially mercury. Ooh, really good at it. Then you can look at melanocyte stimulating hormone. You get a depressed neurotransmitters. I feel flat. Tired and wired or tired and flat, right? The old classic things you look for. And then, of course, you know, where am I at with my MTHFR gene stuff? But more importantly, if I'm, just because you have an MTHFR gene stuff, like if their homocysteine is normal and their mood is good, it doesn't mean you have to push a bunch of folate at them, right? Because this whole thing of genetic nutrition is a little bit interesting to me, because if they're not expressing anything, you have to look more at their genomics and transcriptomics, right? And metabolomics. So what else are you going to see here in our immune system? Elevated CRP, ESR, their IL-6 or TNF alpha, TGF-beta1, VEGF, C4AC3A. They could have food allergies or insensitivities, measurable toxins. Here's the net of this interface. Liver enzymes start to go trend towards high normal. They're depleted their DAO, so I can't break down histamine, which I'm going to go through in a second. And then, of course, their VEGF starts to tank out. When VEGF is really high, what's the risk? If VEGF is really high, if you see somebody with a high VEGF, what should you be thinking? No, colitis and cancer. Yeah, so it's colitis, inflammation in the gut lining. This is just the literature. Once again, I'm just telling you, written a couple books on lab tests. So this is just what, on labs. I'd probably look at lectin-3 for cardiac. Yeah, but I mean, VEGF, it's legit because it's why? It's an inflammatory marker, right? So it's there. And GGT would be big. But if VEGF is really low, that's usually like biotoxin exposure, immune suppression. All right. So, when you start thinking of this swirl, this is what you're seeing. Gordon, how many patients do you see where they're like this? 90%.
90%.
I know his patient population. He has all the messes. Okay, click the button for me. Let me take a deep breath, do my box breathing. Okay, and just quick, somebody said, oh, Gordon's talking about SIBO this afternoon. Well, I'm just bringing this up for you guys. Look at whenever you do a SIBO cause, guess what comes up? Oh my God, stress response. This is just doing literature searches. Yes, diet. Yes, low stomach acid. Yes, I got exposed to bugs. Yes, it could be biotoxins. Yeah, I got it. But you know what we all forget about? Right up top here. Regulate the nervous system. Ask people about their anxiety. Look at their heart rates. If they're doing an aura ring or doing a whoop, really good to look at their quality of sleep at night. I don't know if you're familiar with whoops or auras, but they're great. I started using them on athletes, I don't know, 6 years ago on whoop. And so let's. All right. So what we're really trying to do is we're trying to balance these two aspects of our immune system, right? This is when we start to get too much food intolerance, insensitivities, and of course, when we wear down our natural killer cells. It's interesting, all the thymic peptides that are being used now, right? Why are we using thymic peptides? Because people are so dominant over here that they've lost their maturation, their affinity for their T killer cells. Where do you make your gamma delta T killer cells at? Gamma delta T killer cells. Anybody know gamma delta T killer cells? Here's a hint. Your gut. Yeah, you make your gamma T killer cells in your gut. And when you don't upregulate your gamma T killer cells, guess what? You can't upregulate your defense against an immune system. So like aged garlic extract, for example. Aged garlic extract upregulates gamma delta T killer cells. They did the studies right here at University of Florida. All right, dramatic upregulation, like a significant, and a reduction in flu symptoms that were dramatic in the test that they did. Was that aged garlic extract, AGE, 2,400 milligrams a day. So what's important about this? When the beneficial flora is intact and I can utilize my tryptophan, I inhibit this Th2 side. When my commensal bacteria, remember commensal bacteria get plummeted in the SARS-CoV-2 diagram I showed you? When commensal bacteria leave, I lose both long chain fatty acids. If you look here, the regulation of PPAR regulate IL-10, which is really good for your, kind of balancing your immune function. So basically what this is saying is you need to make sure while you're getting people to eliminate the foods that you've tested them for, that you're working on their intestinal barrier and getting resistant starch back and putting probiotics in so that you're starting to rebuild this. Because I already told you what the big bad wolf is right now for the next 3 to 5 years on commensal bacteria. Dendritic cells, I want to go past that. Just for time's sake. What drugs deplete the microbiome? Here you go. If you guys want, I can send you guys an ebook I just wrote on this. I'll give it to you and you can send it to everybody. I just wrote a handbook for healthcare professionals on this, a quick ebook. I'll just send it to you. But it's pretty interesting because all we do is think about all the time. We think about, oh, antibiotics. Oh, antibiotics are bad. Yeah, they are. They're good, right? They save lives, but they tear people up when they have to be on a long time. But look at these. Oral contraceptives, H2 blockers, metformin, statins, all disrupting. This is 2018 Ailments in Pharmacology and Therapeutics. So this is, once again, this is being published, but are we talking to people about getting on probiotics if they're on these classes of drugs? Are we teaching them how to eat fermented foods? Are we doing anything like that? No. And then we wonder why you get on metformin and why you get on a statin and why you're put on a blood pressure pill and you still progress your renovascular disease. That's been shown. Part of it's because of an acidic pH, right? If you have an acidotic urine, you're going to continue to damage your renal tissue. So the other simple thing you should be doing in everyone, other than asking them for their heart rate, is testing your urinary pH. If they have a very acidotic urinary pH, it is directly correlated with the progression of chronic kidney disease. How do you correct an acidotic urinary pH? Simple. Alkaline foods, perfect. Bicarb, yeah, that's what they give people, right? They give them bicarbonated soda. Right when you're getting ready to have to go on dialysis, they'll give you a sodium bicarb pill to extend your CKD. Well, why don't we take alkalinizing foods, vegetables, dark green leafy, or green drink? Yeah, green drinks, great. Seriously, that is a great green powder. It's phenomenal. So now let's go to this, histamine. Because once again, what's one of the big things that happen when people have food allergies, and how important is it that I actually worry about my histamine if I don't have a welt like I had, big football-sized welts and rashes, right? Oh, I don't have any of that. Where else is histamine important? Let's go through it. Obviously, one of the big things is that you deplete diamine oxidase, which is supposed to break down your histamine. And when histamine is upregulated, and these are the genes that create problems in people that have biotoxin illness. So if you're a biotoxin person, you upregulate your histamine producing, you activate your histamine genes, basically. All right. So that's going to create blood-brain barrier permeability, metaflammation, and of course here, SIRS activates histamine production in virtually all cells. Gordon's going to be talking about that this afternoon. But I got a better slide than this to look at all these. It's this. So take a look at histamine. Histamine, so we wonder, this creates vagal tone issues. So when people ask me, how do you treat POTS? Part of it is creating a dampening of the histamine response, right? So we get dystonia, we get, we've got vaginal dryness. It's an estrogen problem. You got to have estrogen. Maybe. It could also be histaminic. Now, if you measure it's a 60-year-old woman and, you know, her estrogens are 2, then you're trying to help reinvigorate that tissue, got it. But don't forget, histamine is way more involved. Look, arrhythmias, hypotonia, hypertension, migraines, headaches, circadian rhythm arousal. I had a woman that all I did was took her off eating ham, eating pork. She came to me at my institute in Cincinnati. So I never forget this, why it's so powerful for me to test for foods. She comes to me for sleep help. This is 20 years ago, all right? And I did it, and I'm doing everything. You gotta breathe deep, you gotta do your exercise earlier in the day, you gotta be less stressed. I'm gonna bathe you in Relora and theanine, and dip you in melatonin and give you inositol. And oh, by the way, here's a little bit of trazodone, because nothing else was working, and nothing would work. So I was like, I'm gonna do something really weird. I'm gonna test her for foods. And I tested her for foods, and she came up sensitive to pork. And I said, pork, it's wild. I mean, you really eat that much pork? She says, oh yeah, I have a ham sandwich every night before I go to bed.
Oh my God.
You can't make that up. That is what, I took her off the dang ham sandwich, and it's like I didn't need to give her anything. I had to repair her gut still, right? Because she had some histaminic issues and gut permeability issues because of chronically eating that food she was allergic to. So I had to repair that. But the reality is histamine excitatory or inhibitory in your brain? It's excitatory. What do you take? What's the most popular over-the-counter sleep medication? Benadryl, diphenhydramine, and antihistamine, right? Or doxylamine, right? So when people tell you that they do great when they take Benadryl to go to sleep, what should that be telling you? And when you're making excessive histamine, where's that usually coming from? God. All right. So really important now. Next piece. This was kind of interesting too. So aldehyde dehydrogenase. You see where aldehyde dehydrogenase and it activates. So it's important to maintain DAO, but to break down histamine, you need aldehyde dehydrogenase. What inhibits aldehyde dehydrogenase? What grows in your belly that inhibits? Candida. Candida inhibits aldehyde dehydrogenase. Why? It basically eats it up, because when you have candida, you make a lot of acetaldehyde, right? So when people have that ketotic breath, you know, they got a ketotic breath and their tongue's coated, and you ask them a question, you go, so tell me about your symptoms. And they're real bright red and flushed, and they look at you and you say, so tell me about your symptoms. They go, what?
Wait, so alcohol disrupts that enzyme too?
It does. If you're an alcoholic, you're gonna have a disruption. But if we're just talking about from the, I've got candida, what goes on? So what's happening is I don't break down, I deplete my DAO. So you see here with DAO depletion with chronic histamine, right? I build up acetaldehyde. Why is that important? When acetaldehyde builds up, one, it's very inflammatory to the liver, right? You create fibrotic cells in the liver. You end up scarring your liver and inducing fibrosis. But more importantly, what gets made in your brain? I'm really pushing you guys today. Sorry. Beta. Did you ever hear of beta carboline and salsolinol? So when you hear about children who have are on the spectrum and you put them on low phenolic diets in order to calm their brain down. So when you have elevated acetaldehyde, you make phenolic compounds in your brain and you don't make serotonin and dopamine. And so how often do candida people feel, I'm depressed, I can't focus, I can't think straight? Is that rare that they come in, or are they in like, hey, even though I got this candida bug and I'm farting like crazy and I've got all these rashes, I feel amazing up top. Are they like that? They're not. They have cognitive dissonance, in my opinion. You know, they're struggling, and they're struggling because their chemistry, by the upregulation of acetaldehyde due to candida fermentation, and I chew up the acetaldehyde dehydrogenase. Now I start making phenolic compounds in my brain. All right. Interesting, right? Something as simple as candida, right? I mean, you know, let's face it. I mean, candida, humongous fungus among us, everybody's got it. So but you got to remember, candida typically, unless you've just induced it by hitting people really hard with antibiotics. So when you get those folks that are resistant candida folks, you know, like it keeps coming back, then they go, oh, you got to give me more. You got to clean me up again. That usually means there's metabolic inflammation going on. There's something that you've missed upstream if they keep regrowing. And one of the big ones you got to do for this, what's the trace mineral you need for that? Molybdenum. Just thought I'd tell you before you thought too hard. It's molybdenum. Zonulin and histamine, this is the infinite test. Why are these two so important? I think I've made it clear. If your zonulin level is high, you've broken your gut permeability. If your histamine levels are high, you've pushed your mast cells and your histamine producing cells past their limit, and that's going to create all this systemic effect right here. So where you're looking at, you know, oh, my body temperature, my memory, my sleep, why do I have low blood pressure? Yeah, a lot of times it's because you've created some disturbance in your adrenals. One of the responses of the HPA axis is, you know, cut down cortisol production. But you don't get adrenal fatigue. It's a nice marketing term. So histamine issues, very common in food allergies and sensitivities. It reduces diversity of your gut. And when your stool zonulin levels are up, you know, like I said, when zonulin is up, it's stress, it's exposures, it's bugs, right? Stress, exposures, and bugs. All right, so.
Yeah, you better. Where's the time
Do
go?
I need to go faster for you guys?
Lance, get to the end of your slides.
I can speed it up. I'm not gonna get to the end of the slides. I gave you so many. I gave you guys a bunch of supplement slides. I think you're good at reading supplement slides, right? This supplement for this is the dose, this is what you use it for. Okay, next. We will resume shortly. No, we're resuming right now. Here we go. All right. Let's look at, we already kind of went through these chronic health conditions. Let's look at cardiovascular disease. Really important. 2019 study, those with cardiovascular disease more frequent intolerances to food, banana, dairy, eggs. They didn't do a big study. But in general, what we see makes sense. People that have chronic inflammation response triggering is going to lead to endothelial dysfunction. Okay. So this is another one. Start with the end in mind. I like to give you the whole picture, then we deconstruct, right? So if you look, a high fat diet. So I get it. I love people that say, oh yeah, I mostly do a ketogenic diet. So what, you do it 4 days a week and 3 days you eat all the carbs you want? How you doing it? Well, I do it during the day, but hey, if there's a football game or a basketball game and they got the nachos out, you know, I'm kind of quasi almost keto, which is more dangerous than just, you know, keto. And the biggest problem with keto, just honestly, is the fact that it doesn't have enough fiber in it. So you lose your short chain fatty acid production. That's the problem. That's the big problem. I happen to think that people don't eat enough vegetables when they eat keto, and that's another problem. But if you look here, this is just kind of a summary of what we've been talking about, but now I'm pushing into endothelium. Gut microbiota dysbiosis, we talked about how that happens, right? Intestinal permeability shifts, leading to endotoxemia, which creates our low-grade inflammation. So when you're seeing things like elevated CRPs, think lipopolysaccharide. Just don't think, oh, you got inflammation because you twisted your ankle, right? And then, of course, insulin resistance, insulin home IR, look at glucose. I've looked, red blood cell magnesium, serum potassiums, when they're running low normal, you pretty much know they're probably insulin resistant, right? Because you spill mag and potassium as you become more insulin resistant. And then, of course, which leads to obesity, diabetes, and other metabolic disorders. Then we layer in the gut-brain interaction that's going on, right? So isn't this your world? So my point to this is, you should be looking at morning and night blood pressures on people. Are they dippers or non-dippers? If their blood pressure's staying up, what's that mean? What's it mean if their blood pressure stays up at night? Or 135/95 during the day and 135/95 at night? Sympathetic, yeah, sympathetic overload. Good job. Exactly. So what's their heart rate? What is their blood pressure? What's their advanced lipid panel look like? What's their ox-LDL? What's their lipid particle size? What's their monocytes, right? You want to be looking at all of that because you can be predictive. I just had this guy, chief wellness officer for a Fortune 50 company. Oh yes, I'm completely all about being well. I'm Mr. Well. And yeah, they call me Mr. Well. And and we did Andy Heyman and I did his disguise because we're showing this thing for a corporate. His cortisol was elevated. So he's the head of a Fortune 50 company in wellness. So he's stressed out. He's not doing any exercise currently. He used to be an avid runner and did exercise. Really wasn't watching his diet. It said that nothing was wrong, but when we pushed him, he's like, oh yeah, I'm shot by 4 o'clock. My memory isn't where it should be. Where was he? Cortisol high, a 115 blood sugar, driven by the cortisol, eating inappropriately. But his lipids were, his LDL particle number was 2200. His oxidized LDL was out of bounds. So he's that guy that's normal weight executive, Mr. Wellness, that is going to end up with a myocardial infarction in 5 years. So why I'm telling you this is all the pressure of adrenal, thyroid, pancreas, insulin, glucose, poor thyroid metabolism, cortisol and cortisol curve in conjunction with gut immune brain, the dysfunction of gut immune brain. Think of it almost as a funnel, or these systems are stacking on each other. And where are they leading? To people becoming vasculopaths. That's what happens. They become vasculopaths.
Vascular what?
Vasculopath. It's a term for basically you're plaquing your arteries and you're getting coronary artery disease, a vasculopath. So this is where you start to see, endopath disruptions, inappropriate heart rate variabilities, right? Lipids matter. They really do. I always love it when people would say to me, oh, lipids don't matter. Well, no, they do matter because depending on what your inflammatory chemistry is, lipids are really bad. Yes, you could have really high lipids and have no heart disease, but you probably don't have a lot of inflammation in your body. Or you could be lucky and have a good set of genes, right? Lipids do matter. Risk factors do matter. And it's all about metaflammation. So there's a lot of literature starting to come out about heart disease and things like food allergies and sensitivities. So when we get back to it, it's like that, ground zero is that gut and getting it right. Getting it right. Coronary disease, chronic inflammatory disease, it's not a lipid storage disease. Obviously, when you look at CRP and IL-6, it's stronger associated independent risk factor for future events for both primary and secondary prevention. This is all the way back in, my God, these are from 1997 to, of course, some of these are from 2018. So CRP and IL-6, how do we upregulate IL-6? Inflammatory cytokine chemistry, stress, gut response, inflammatory response, and cytokine regulation due to our recent pandemic. That's why I'm saying in the next 3 to 5 years, this is where you guys are rolling. You're not just helping their gut, you're reducing their risk of heart attack, you're reducing their risk of cancer, you're reducing their risk of diabetes, because it's all mushed together. But you've got to start to, when I look at it, I look at a person and go, all right, how do I get this inflammatory bucket that's full of inflammatory chemicals? How do I start getting the ladle and getting this stuff out? Right? That's really what you're doing. You're trying to figure ways to get it out. The quick way is, okay, manage stress, change your food. And then change your food in a way that you know is going to be really effective for your immune system, which is test for it. But then, of course, the heart-gut, gut connection. Obviously, this heart-gut axis, gut imbalances directly linked to heart disease. There's this big issue around microbial metabolites in TMAO. So if you have dysbiosis and you're eating a lot of carnitine, taking in carnitine, a lot of meat, you could make trimethylamine amino oxide, right? So you can make TMAO. And TMAO, which is a microbial metabolite, is directly related to myocardial infarction. So you can measure TMAO. So when you look at this connection, the heart to the gut, it's dysbiosis, decreasing the tight junctions, creating protein expression, and increasing gut permeability leads to the reasons why we have heart disease. Diabetes alters metabolic homeostasis and contributes to this. I'll never forget seeing the American, I'll have it in here, American Journal of Diabetes Association Journal. They were talking, this is like 2008. They had a study showing that the higher your serum lipopolysaccharide, right? They literally mapped it out and said, if you have this level, you have one sign of metabolic syndrome. If you have this level of lipopolysaccharide, you have 2 markers for metabolic syndrome. If you have this level, you have 3. If you have this level, you have all 5. So even though the gut is tightly tied to cardiometabolic illness, it's still not being, in fact, we're still giving statins, which cause microbiome disruption. Okay. These are big issues that we're not getting addressed. So once again, microbiome, you need these short-quitting fatty acids. Why? Because there's a direct inhibition of NF-kappa B when you upregulate butyrate. There's a direct inhibition of NF-kappa B. So I turn down the genetic expression of inflammatory cascades in my cells when I take in butyrate and make butyrate. And butyrate and propionic acid end up inhibiting lipopolysaccharide release of IL-6. So an LPS, I don't think I have any slides on this. I had a lot of slides I could have given you. Should have saw what this presentation was to begin with. So lipopolysaccharide, there's 2 ways it gets in your cell. This is why it's so dangerous. It gets through your cell because you have an LPS receptor on your cell membrane. On the cell surface, there's a lipopolysaccharide receptor. And you hit that and it triggers NF-kappa B. But lipopolysaccharide also can move through the lipid rafts of your cell membrane. So it can passively diffuse into the cell membrane and trigger inflammatory compounds. So why am I trying to get the gut integrity going? Because when I have elevated lipopolysaccharide, by default, I'm going to end up with heart disease. It's going to happen.
What do you think of butyrate supplements?
I'd rather have people make butyrate. I'd rather have meat resistant starch. I'd rather them take in ghee personally. I know some people use them. It's great, but I like to try to get their diet to start to do some of this because nobody wants to tell people, like I always say I have ruthless compassion in my practice because I tell people what they need to do. And I'm going to love them. If they come back and they fall short, it's okay. I'm still going to love them and want to work with them and help them. But I never stop what they need to do. This is what you need to do. Right? So it's people, I'm just saying in general, I find everybody tells me how they struggle with getting people to stay on their diets. I'm like, you're teaching a way of eating in order to be healthy. Quit talking about diet. This is the way you eat in order to get your next goal. What is your next goal for your health? I'm just telling you, it's ground zero. It is ground zero getting people to pick healthier food. So obviously this is an easy one. I'm not even gonna go through this. This is so right on. Other than apolipoprotein B, please look at their ApoE gene SNPs and make sure they understand the whole SAT-FAT thing and how to do SAT-FAT, because I have a lot of people that, yeah, I'm doing ketogenic, I'm drinking 4 gallons of coconut oil a day. Okay, not 4 gallons, it's an exaggeration, 1 gallon. But the point being is that it doesn't matter whether it's a plant SAT-FAT or an animal SAT-FAT. If you're an ApoE 3444, you're going to trigger inflammatory chemistry by taking in over 25 grams of saturated fat a day. I try to keep people down below 20. ApoE 3444, that's in like cardiology journals. This is like, once again, this is stuff that is so simple, but nobody's emphasizing it enough. I'm telling you right now, you can give people all the ashwagandha, curcumin, and frankincense you want. And if they're an ApoE 34 and they're eating 40 grams of saturated fat a day, they're going to be an inflammatory generator. It's that simple. Yeah, so you gotta get to that. Again, my clicker's not clicking. It's a 2007 study, 30 obese children, 30 normal weight children. Do IgG antibodies increase risk of vascular inflammation and atherogenesis? These are obese juveniles compared to normal weight. Significant increase in intimal media thickness with higher IgE or IgG, elevated CRP, and higher IgG. So food antibodies, IgG food antibodies positively associated with endothelial dysfunction and of the carotid arteries in obese juveniles. So yeah, it starts that young, and food's at the center of it. And if you're wondering what, obviously like a polysaccharide, it's the endotoxin. Look, you have like a polysaccharide in your mouth, right? If you're a plaque former, I'm a plaque former. Like, it doesn't matter how I eat. I can fast for 30 days and go in and they'll go, oh, you made plaque. It's a genetic thing. But if you're a plaque former, you got to work even that much harder on your teeth. If you're basically, those plaques burst, right? And what's in them? Lipopolysaccharide. Then what do? You swallow it, and what's it do? Lipopolysaccharide binding protein 3, right? It's a carrier, and it shuttles it to your tissues and organs. So yeah, dental health is super important. And of course, when you have elevated lipopolysaccharide, you break the tight junctions. Yeah, I've already said it makes up a bunch of the outer wall of the cell and for gram-negative bacteria. So when I get reduced blood flow due to insulin resistance or diabetes or lack of exercise, what's going to happen? Bacteria die, LPS goes up. So how is it induced? Stress, ketogenic diets, ibuprofen, overtraining, binge drinking, of course, poor foods, and then of course, you can think there's other things that can happen. So here's why endotoxin is so important. If you look, you see upregulation of TNF alpha, it upregulates your coagulation factor system. So if you're looking at, right now, if you're in the biotoxin community, people are doing those gene tests to look at suppressor and activator genes, right? Activation or suppression. Is blood clotting an important part of that? Is it a part of that test of looking at suppression and activation and increase of blood clotting, right? It is. So here's what's happening. I'm getting exposed to something. I'm triggering an inflammatory response. If I've got the genes to induce a more likely stickier blood, but then my gut is broken down, I'm activating those coagulation markers at the same time. All right. So pretty important. Look here, upregulation of C3A. Where do you see that? C3A is important. Well, things like autoimmunity, like in lupus, right? So this is an important component that I think a lot of the, well, Gordon's gonna talk about it. I won't even go into it. We'll talk about it this afternoon. But I think for a lot of that community on SERS, they don't pay enough attention to the gut. And therefore they can get it, a lot of times these people end up in this little bit of a quagmire where they're kind of getting better, but they're not all the way better because there's not enough emphasis on getting the gut right. Here's the oral activity, just so you know, so binds to LPS and binding protein, and that binding protein ends up triggering NF-kappa B. And this is just stress-induced endotoxemia, increases permeability. It's just a proof of what I just told you already. I'm just kind of giving you that. And oh, by the way, they proved that in obese people, they have increased microglial activation due to lipopolysaccharide, which alters their HPA axis and causes them to gain weight. So why do people lose weight when they follow their food allergy diet? Because I'm down regulating the inflammation, I'm repairing the LPS, I'm getting the zonulin under control, less LPS production, and now I start to lose weight. All right? And then you can look at this, and of course, here's dysbiosis. With dysbiosis, we get a change in permeability and upregulation of TMA. A lot of people are taking a lot of choline right now. So if you're doing a lot of choline for brain repair, you should be looking at TMAO in individuals. It's not bad. I love choline. I remember doing a study where we gave people choline and we looked at their acetylcholine to glutamate ratios in their brain. We imaged their brain. So we did you actually did a diazepam tracer on their brain, and then we did a scan on their brain, and we could measure their glutamate to acetylcholine. And then we gave them acetylcholine, and their molecules of memory went up and their glutamate went down, and people felt they weren't answering like this anymore. Right? They're back sharp again, 8 out of 10 people. So my point on this is pretty simple. With gut permeability and the upregulation of TMAO, we're doubling down on our damage to our endothelial cells. You see this? Upregulation of TMAO produces bone cell formation. Then we get platelet aggregation, which now creates plaque. Right? So you see why you gotta get all the pressure you can off of that gut endothelium. That's what you're trying to do, because it's at the center of all this stuff. Can you click me? Yes. So TMAO, at the middle of progression of cardiovascular disease, directly linked to cardiovascular events, directly linked to endothelial dysfunction, directly linked to chronic inflammation. It is a marker for gut permeability, but even more importantly, remember, if I've got gut permeability problems, I'm going to enhance this. So therefore, correct this. Oh, inflammasomes we talked about. This is the other one. It's crazy. So when you start thinking about the gut, so the gut-liver axis, so you get bile acid metabolism connects the gut and the intestine. So bile acid dysregulation leads to dysbiosis. Do people get bile acid dysregulation with biotoxin exposure? That's one of the biggest things that happens to them. That's why you got to give them binding agents to pull out a lot of the inflammatory compounds in the bile. It allows gram-negative pathogens and LPS to enter via the portal vein and triggers hepatic inflammation. What's that mean? Basically, what you do is you impair that intestinal barrier. You now grow those bugs. You get a hepatitis, basically, and trigger cholestatic injury. So dysbiosis in and of itself triggers liver injury. That's why we want to correct it. What? Let's go to where I put up. They changed all the. Huh. So if you look here, then, and this is just, once again, it's these inflammasomes. Remember what I said? When you eat too much, you eat too often, you don't get a break, you don't induce autophagy, and you're creating these inflammasomes. When you create these inflammasomes, it triggers the damage to your cells. And so this is basically it. So bile acids activate inflammasomes. So when you're upregulating the inflammatory process in the macrophages, it affects the integrity of the cholangiocytes and leads to damage and hepatocyte death. So you get cholangitis. Wow. So, number one cause of liver transplant in the next 5 years. More complex than that. Fatty liver. Damage to the liver. Just damage, acetaminophen being one part of it, but fatty liver. Damage to the liver. Non-alcoholic fatty liver. Yes. So once again, I just put this up here to show you guys. This stuff is all through our journals. But we're still, you know what we're worried about? Oh, I better do an organic acid test. Did you do an advanced lipid panel on somebody? Are you looking at the markers that are published in the literature? Journal of the American College of Cardiology, 2019. Bile acid activation, inflammation, decreased inflammation, increased insulin sensitivity. When do we have proper bile acid function? What this is basically saying is the intestinal microbiota and its metabolic contributions to cardiometabolic health and disease. When my TMA was upregulated, when my LPS is upregulated, I end up with plaque, I end up with chronic kidney disease. Are you measuring all the things that are around us? When somebody comes in with a 62 GFR, are you thinking about their metabolic inflammation that's going on? And what you're going to do to reverse that and get that GFR back up in the 70s or 80s? This is the stuff that's being, I'm not saying we're doing anything about it. I'm just saying, God, it's all over the literature. All right. So once again, putting it all together, westernized food, low fiber, not just on hormones, decreased butyrate, increased permeability in the gut, decreased butyrate, increased inflammation systemically, decreased permeability, increased lipopolysaccharide, heart failure, plaque. It's still the number one reason everybody's dying. You got to get their gut together for their heart. So like my goal today, I'm just telling you because I know my time is running short. My goal today was to get you guys to think about why food allergies and sensitivities matter in an expanded population, other than somebody that comes to you and says, oh yeah, I'm gassy, I'm bloated, I've got diarrhea or constipation. You need to correct the gut because it gives you insights into the lens of stress response. It gives you insights into the lens of cardiometabolic disease, histamine and all the issues that are surrounding it. And then the last piece I'll go through is with this. You know, look at diabetes. You guys can read these. This stuff is easy. I want to get to this. And weight gain's an easy one. I want to get to the next piece. We kind of talked about autoimmunity already. I gave you guys a lot of slides. Oh my God. Let's get to, here we go. Once again, gut, immune, HPA axis. An amplifier of autoimmunity, current opinions in immunology, 2018. Everything I was kind of talking to you about is being published, but we're not really teaching any solutions unless you guys are out taking your Saturday to get educated and try to do something on your own, right? It's not formal enough. It just isn't. I really want to get to the nervous system stuff because these are all ones that you can read. Oh, now don't read that book. It's terrible. Zonulin and I went through really well already. And remember, zonulin testing, histamine testing. The bottom line to zonulin is if it's up, figure out why. And you should be testing for it regularly. Just check the box next to the food allergy test. Do zonulin and histamine. I think I've convinced you why zonulin and histamine are important. And then I want to get to this again. Oh, all these are easy. Here, a couple more. I want to get right to the last slide. So this is all the. Yeah, get to the peptides. Yeah, you guys can reach. If you're going to learn from Gordon on that, and I'm going to be around all day. You guys can hit me up with this stuff. But I thought I had more stuff on the heart rate variability on this and how it affects heart disease. So the big thing for you guys to keep note of is vagal tone and heart rate are two of the biggest predictors for future heart disease. So you want to look at blood pressures. You want to look at heart rate. Heart rate should be 62 or less. If they got bradycardia, that's a different deal, right? Really, you want people below 62. Every 4 points above 62 is a 7 to 10% increased risk of cardiometabolic illness. What's that? For every 4 points above 62 is a 7 to 10% increased risk of cardiometabolic illness. Risk. And then low heart rate variability means that you've lost vagal tone, right? You don't have flexibility in your nervous system anymore. And one of the big things to look for that is a flattened cortisol curve, right? That's one. Two is just people that have, if people have been stressed out, I've got to rebuild their stress response. So I use things like, are you perseverating and tired? Things like theanine are really good for people that perseverate and you want to try to reset their nervous system. Saffron, great for depression. Relora, great for food cravings and resetting their nervous system. But in the end, you guys are inundated with what products to use on this stuff. I can gladly talk to you about ingredients, but you want these hallmark thoughts of at the middle of this gut is gut immune brain. And with gut immune brain, it reaches into cardiometabolic illness. It reaches into autoimmunity. It reaches into diabetes. Why? Because when I trigger inflammation due to the foods I'm eating and the breakdown of my gut, those inflammatory compounds start to alter the mechanics of how I make energy in my cell, mitochondrial damage, and metaflammation. All right? Okay. I don't know. Did you guys get enough, or is that like not enough density, or are we okay? Cool. All right, I'll answer a few questions before we break for lunch. I know we're due. I'm finishing a minute early here, but I want to make sure we can do questions.
Regarding toxins, you don't use vaccinations herb to draw any other naturally?
I've used all kinds of stuff. Fulvic acid, shilajit is a form of diatomaceous earth, right? It's vegetation that's broken down over centuries and centuries. I've used okra. If you're talking about a non-cholestyramine or drug way to get the inflammasomes out of the bile acids, okra is probably in a study showed to have the highest binding affinity. So it's different for what toxin you're trying to get out, right? Like if you're trying to go for inflammagens, which are the inflammatory compounds that are produced by an insult, things like okra can bind it. Fulvic acid will bind it. If I'm looking at things like, glyphosate, then I'm thinking things like cilantro, chlorella that have a high binding affinity for nonpolar compounds in the gut, right? So you're going to think about what do I use for detoxification? Yeah. Yep.
With fasting, will that decrease all of that? In other words, so.
Will fasting fix everything? Well, it won't fix everything, but I've lectured. I'm on the advisory board. I'm worked with the Keck Center for Longevity on research in fasting. Okay, so I know a little bit about it. The most valuable part about fasting, or even using like the fasting mimic diet. So fasting mimic diet that the Keck Center for Longevity developed, where it mimics the effect of fasting while you're eating food. They have a food kit that they do that with, is that it triggers autophagy, right? Fasting triggers autophagy, which is eating up those waste proteins and debris that your body is making, and you become incompetent to clean those up, right? Or you have an intrinsic cell defect that doesn't make it easy to clean those up, right? Probably one of the best examples of that is Parkinson's, right? You have protein aggregation, within the neurons, which you can't clear up. So you have elevated alpha-synuclein and elevated neurolaminin that can't the autophagy, if you're not inducing autophagy, you don't have a chance of cleaning that up. So it's an accelerated model of proteins in the neurons. So fasting will help that if people can fast. I have a lot of people that are dysglycemic, so I don't trust fasting them unless they're actually in-house somewhere being fasted and supervised. I just don't trust it.
What was the group you spoke of?
Keck Center for Longevity, that's USC School of Medicine. Keck, K-E-C-K. They probably got 70 papers now on fasting that are
Wow.
published. They've got NIH grants exceeding $60 million studying fasting.
So can you define for me fasting? Is it 24 hours, 48, 15 hours?
So there's some people that, if, fasting as little as 14 hours may induce autophagy.
14, 16.
The majority of the literature would say you got to go 3 days water fast. But there is some papers that would support that even a 14-hour period of time will induce autophagy.
Yeah.
I have issues when people are going 16 hours, 7 days a week, because in the animal models doing that, they started to starve the organs of the animals. And so there was some issues around 7 day a week, 16-hour day fasts. So I'm a more bigger advocate of doing the 16-hour or a 24-hour, like do a 24-hour once a week or a 16-hour twice a week, and then resort to like a 12 to 14, eat to fast modality. But it's just my opinion. I'm not,
Well, no, but. and the
everybody's
reason
got different opinions.
Because what he brought up is, I mean, a lot of people are coming in and I'm pro fasting, but at the same time, where are the risk benefits, and I've heard and read, 3 days is gonna, increase or maximize the autophagy of breaking down these biomes. But, that's a tough.
And it has other risks associated with it. So, I mean, it's not as clear cut. And well, I'm gonna leave you with this. If you think any one heroic effort is going to fix the people that I was talking to you about today, came to the wrong lecture. You need to work on their gut and test. Like, I know you guys are going to look at your folders. You got to look at that. I'm telling you, you got to look at histamine. You got to look at zonulin. You got to understand the impact of stress. You got to measure heart. You need to know their heart rate. You need to know their blood pressures in the morning and night. These are, and urinary pH, I'm pretty passionate about, because guess what? If you're getting them to lose weight and they're releasing toxins out of their fat, which is known, right? We know that the heavier you are, the more toxic you are. It's a real simple, by biopsy, they know it. If I have an acidic urine and I'm releasing that out of my fat, guess what you're doing to your nephrons and your glomeruli? You're damaging them, because when it's acidotic, those stored toxins get liberated, right? Once again, they liberate and become a free ion, and then upregulate your oxidative stress. So you lose your redox poise in your kidneys. And that's what causes kidney disease, right? I mean, just look it up in journals of nephrology. Don't believe me, it is a loss of redox poise. Now, why did you lose the redox poise? Inappropriate diet, low pH, environmental burden, any number of reasons why you lose redox poise, right? Hence the value of glutathione, SOD, catalase. Why am I upregulating my antioxidant defense network? I'm trying to protect my kidneys, right? So, yep.
What is the Solidago work?
Well, Solidago, Shatavari, I mean, they are, like, Solidago is known as an aquaretic. So it decreases inflammatory signaling in the nephrons of the kidneys. So it has an anti-inflammatory effect. Yep. Works really good. Shatavari and Solidago are really good for raising GFRs on people.
A quick question. A lot of people like to take it off for longevity. I saw that. I didn't know that it affects the biome. What do you think about that? Do you recommend it or not? Number two, some of the people that need resistant starch the most cannot tolerate it. Many people with SIBO or gut issues. In order to increase the food rate, what alternative is there?
Okay, so Gordon's going to talk about SIBO this afternoon. So it depends on what kind of resistant starch you're getting, for one. Two is you work on cleaning up their gut first, then they can tolerate the resistant starch. So you may have to get rid of the bad bugs and then start on their resistant starch, but not give them resistant starch before the bad bugs are taken care of, right? Because they'll just ferment that. You'll make methanogens, right? They're methanogens, right? That's what those bugs are. They're called methanogens. Or you break down and make hydrogen sulfide. I'm sure we'll talk about that. Metformin. I'm a peptide guy. So I like Moxie and semaglutide more than metformin personally. I like metformin. I'm not against it. I think as drugs go, it has some anti-aging benefit, but it's in a population of people. But what do you need to measure on somebody that you're giving metformin to? What do you need to measure in their blood?
A1C.
Creatinine, A1C, you're all missing it. Keep going.
Oh, yeah.
No, keep going. What happens to, what does metformin do? Okay, now we're getting you. Now, what's the marker for depletion of B12 in your blood?
Like a velocity.
Methylmalonic acid. You have to measure methylmalonic acid in serum. That's suggested by the American Society for Endocrinology. I mean, that is not what.
Nobody's doing that.
Yeah, but it's recommended by the people that are, it's like by the boards are telling you that you need to measure methylmalonic acid if you're on metformin. Why? It's not if you're going to get neuropathy, it's when. So whether you're getting diabetic neuropathy or methylmalonic acid induced neuropathy because of a reduced B12, you're still going to get it.
So would that have an effect on your methylation? If you have a double negative for your methylation?
It isn't, I mean, I'm popular, quick. Look, methylation is so much more complex than B12 and folate, right? No, I mean how it's affected. So whether those gene SNPs are turned on or off. Once you are on metformin, don't worry about your gene SNP. It's going to do it to you no matter what in a subpopulation of people. By default, metformin depletes B12 and you will mimic that gene SNP with B12 deficiency. It won't matter. It depletes B12. It depletes CoQ10. Not in every person. Remember, drug-induced nutrient depletions are not in every person. You still have to look for them. Are they exhibiting the behavior? If a woman's on oral contraceptives and ends up depressed 6 months later, you know she's got a B6 error. She's depleted B6. They've shown that in studies. And they give her B6 back and all of a sudden not depressed anymore. Why? Because now she can take her tryptophan and make serotonin because the oral contraceptive knocked out her B6. Right? Those are old studies. Those aren't even new. That's like old school stuff. That's like we're writing our books on drug nutrient depletion. I mean, it was shocking. Like even, methylmalonic acid, nobody's doing that, but everybody's giving out metformin like, oh my God, it's going to make you live to 120. So what you would do is, yes, you would supplement B12 if you were going to continue them on metformin. You would give them B12. Yep.
With B12.
I like methylcobalamin or adenosylcobalamin. That's the ones I use orally. But yeah, when drugs deplete nutrients, it doesn't make the drug bad. You just have to replace the nutrient.
That are irreversible. I mean, I've seen it in the literature. I've seen it for many years of PPIs.
Well, I mean, and why? What's going on? You've damaged the intrinsic factors so badly that they can't absorb, right? So that's what's happening most of the time. Is you're getting
injections. I can't.
Are you using alpha-lipoic acid with it? Try using alpha-lipoic acid. I'd start at 600 milligrams twice a day for about 60 days and see if you get any improvement in neuropathy. And then go down to 300 twice a day. See if that'll help. All right, it's time to eat. You guys are
Two more
wonderful for listening. What's that?
Two
More
more
questions? What is the increase in blood sugar baseline and percentage of heart disease? I'm not sure. What specific probiotic do you recommend to start with and what amounts? Oh, okay. Do you have to change probiotics every 2 weeks? I don't change probiotics every 2 weeks. Maybe every 3 or 4 months I flip it around, but I mean, I don't change probiotics every 2 weeks. I really, look, there's a bunch of companies with good probiotics. Numedica has great probiotics. Metagenics has great probiotics. Wakanaga, Hyodophilus is a great probiotic, human strain, DNA verified, right? So what I tell you is learn about what's working. Like if I have I've used basically the same probiotics for the last 35 years. I really have not changed my probiotic. A few here and there, a few, but not a lot. As the information is starting to come out, there's probably using like Akkermansia or something like that. As it comes and becomes more available, I'll do it. What was the increase in blood sugar baseline and the percentage of heart disease? I think I know what you're asking. So this was about the higher the postprandial blood sugar, the higher the endothelial dysfunction and damage. And you can look that one up really easy because it's the leading cause of heart disease is postprandial hyperglycemia. And that's why all diabetics end up with heart disease. Right. All right, enough. Enjoy lunch break, and you're going to have a great afternoon. Dr. Crozier is amazing and really, really, really great lecture.
I think you said that if it goes above 84, then you have 7% increase.
Oh no, every point above 84. That wasn't related to cardiovascular disease though. So every point above 84 is a 6% risk of becoming a person with diabetes in the next decade. So a 95 is 10, that's 60% risk. A 99 is 14, woo, 84% risk and you're still in normal. Yeah, and that's Kaiser's big 10-year study. All right. They're not sick. So do the smaller. Don't do the big. And it's telling you, even though it's fine. Yeah, so no, don't do the big ones. Take the biggest screws out.